Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku's quirk was linked to her enigmatic eyes part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. Imagine a world where fiction and the impossible were reality. What's more than that even, a world where they were the norm. A world where being abnormal was no longer something to simply jeer and gawk at. A world full of billions of extraordinary people, many of which with extraordinary abilities. Now imagine your parents were in the majority of the extraordinary. And not only that, but they were seen as two of the greatest heroes there ever was. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐲 were thought of as the greatest hero partnership to ever come out of UA. But it wasn't just because they worked well together, it was because they knew each other better than the backs of their own hands. Always moving in ways and doing things so in sync that you would think they had telepathy. Naomi Tanaka and Riku Sato met in their 3rd year of middle school, quickly hitting it off and becoming inseparable. And as fate would have it, they both enrolled and managed to get into UA. Naomi Tanaka had the ability to transform any part of herself into that of an animal's. She could choose to have inhuman strength by turning her arms into that of a bear's. She could fly high to places other heroes struggled to reach by making them wings instead. She could listen in on the subtlest of conversations by sprouting bat ears atop of her head. The list could go on. She took on the title of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, whereas Riku Sato could make his enemy see anything he wanted them to. The villain was afraid of spiders. He would make them see one the size of a building. He needed to calm down a child. He'd have them see their favorite animal. There were too many villains to face off with. Well, he'd just make it look like he has an army of heroes until more arrive. Endless possibilities at his disposal. So, alongside his best friend, he declared himself 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐲. It wasn't long after they became famous pro heroes at the ages of 21 and 22 that they announced their marriage. And once people started noticing 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐲 going at it alone only a few months later, rumors began surfacing. The two most popular ones on the internet being, they were separating, or they were pregnant. Once Silver returned 10 months later, it was safe to assume the latter was correct. After their return, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐲 continued raising in the ranks, even going as far as creating their own hero agency, which they dubbed 𝐒𝐻𝐬𝐿𝐴𝐼𝐺𝐸. The public wouldn't see 𝗔𝗂𝐁𝐲 solo again for almost 7 years. This time there were no rumors of a divorce, just congratulations on another blessing. What the civilians didn't know at the time, what no one knew, was that the second child the two esteemed heroes were bringing into the world would surpass even them and become one of the world's greatest heroes, right alongside her closest friends and former classmates. Yes, it was that class. Nori, you might want to give her some space, okay? A 7-year-old boy with striking golden eyes nodded, but didn't bother stepping away from the frilly white bassinet. He distractedly brushed back his long maroon hair, not taking his eyes off of what laid in the tiny bed. Papa, a man with natural brown hair, looked up from the report he was going over, his matching golden eyes looking through a round pair of glasses and at his son. "What's the matter, Nori?" the man questioned, already fearing the worst. "Why, she got dog ears. And a tail too," Nori asked. A slight lisp from a missing tooth laced his words. The boy's father relaxed, eyes going back down to the report. "Well, that has to do with her quirk." Nori's brows furrowed. "But why she got him now? I didn't get my quirk till I was 3. The man smiled softly. "Everyone's quirks are different, Nori. She has a mutation type, which starts developing as soon as the baby's made. While it seems your sister will have a quirk like your mother's, you took more after me." Nori nodded along. What his father said made sense, as his own quirk was almost nothing like his mother's. Rather, it was a warped version of his father's, where instead of making the conscious decision of what to make someone see, Nori could release a pheromone from his pores that when anyone inhaled, would make them see their worst fear. It wasn't a very happy or heroic quirk, but then again, he never really wanted to be a hero in the first place. He'd much rather make things. After seeing the emotional distress his quirk could cause, he made a promise never to use it on anyone innocent, especially after he accidentally used it on his parents when it first manifested. With his eyes still locked on his baby sister, he made her the same promise. If he could help it, she would never have to face her worst nightmare. The infant in question was sound asleep, tiny pointed orange ears flicking every few minutes, somehow managing to look massive on the baby's head. The flicking was always followed by her slightly curled tail wagging once or twice between her legs, the underside of the curl gleaming a shiny white in contrast to the orange. But the orange and white fur of her ears and tail couldn't have been more different from the bright light pink of her hair. And if she opened her eyes, the boy would be greeted by 2 just as striking fuchsia irises, both sitting under thick and matching rosy pink lashes. When the baby was first brought home, Nori had been wary. Why should he like the thing that made his lovely mother swell up like a balloon? The thing that made his parents run off to the hospital in a panic in the middle of the night, leaving him alone with the nanny. The thing that seemed to have vocal cords of steel, using them to wail to her heart's content most nights. No, there was no way he would grow attached to the thing. That mindset shattered like glass the second he heard her giggle for the first time. Ever since then, Nori had appointed himself as her guardian, watching over her and doting on her to the point that the 7-year-old even knew how to properly prepare a bottle for his sister. Both males looked up as the nursery door opened, the oiled hinges twisting almost soundlessly, something they made sure to do after a tiny squeak woke and frightened the infant one night. A tall woman with snowy white hair and tan skin peeked into the room, taking in the adorable and somewhat hilarious sight of her boss casually sitting and doing his work on a giant puppy-themed chair. She quickly stifled a giggle, red eyes swimming with mirth. "Miss Naomi has finished preparing breakfast, sir." The man smiled good-naturedly, fully aware of how silly he looked. "Thank you, Ayami. And what did Omi and I say about the whole Miss and Sir thing? You're practically family. There's no need for that." A light blush rose on the young woman's cheeks, hands twisting in the skirt of her maid's uniform, an outfit she insisted on wearing, as it made her feel more like the real deal, and nodded meekly. Nori finally, and reluctantly, stepped away from his sister, watching his father as the man carefully picked her up, cradling her to his chest. The three made their way through several rooms and hallways, finally reaching their enormous kitchen. A woman older and taller than Ayami brushed her hands off on her floral-printed apron. Her silver eyes lit with pride as she stared down at the large assortment of food she had made. Her relation was made clear once seeing the rosy pink hair tied up into a messy bun at the base of her head, just a few shades darker than the baby's. "I brought them, my Naomi," Ayami stuttered, quickly correcting herself. The pinkette looked up from the food, placing her hands on her hips and grinning impishly. "Well, think it'll be enough, Riku?" Naomi asked sarcastically. Her husband smiled in amusement. I don't know. Nori might have to fend for himself." He joked in return. Said boy stopped staring at all the food in wonder, instead sending his father an annoyed glare. "But really, why did you make all this?" Riku questioned. Suddenly a dark aura surrounded Naomi. "You try sitting on your ass for 9 months straight because your husband's a paranoid helicopter hubby," she hissed, still wearing a smile. Riku gulped, brow twitching in fear. Oh. The aura suddenly disappeared as fast as it arrived. Naomi clapped her hands, a genuine smile now present. Riku could never get used to Naomi's postpartum mood swings. "I just felt like doing something," she answered simply. The 4 people in the room who were standing all looked over as the infant in her father's arms started squirming, making squeaks of discontent. Nori's hand shot up. "I'll warm up a bottle." Naomi and Riku laughed softly, whereas the boy's nanny gave a faint sigh. "I'll help him," Ayami muttered, walking over to her charge before he broke anything. Naomi held out her hands. "Here, let me take her." Riku complied, and it wasn't long after being transferred to her mother that the baby fell silent. Naomi stared down into her daughter's sparkling pink eyes, smiling widely as her tiny ears flicked back and forth, now taking in all the noise around her. "Morning, Hitomi." Time flew by, many months seeming to pass in a blur. Naomi and Riku were back in the grind of hero work, and were once again the top dogs of any hero partnership. One could argue the reason they worked so well was because neither one was the sidekick. Both were equal, and would never doubt the other. Ayami was back to working on the house chores, now that Naomi was off of maternity leave. She was honestly relieved to be doing them again, as the woman hadn't ever had the heart to tell Naomi when she was doing something wrong. As for Nori and Hitomi, they hadn't changed much. Only now, Hitomi had the nasty habit of vanishing. Nori was standing in the center of their living room, frantically running his hands through his newly done dreadlocks, mentally writing his will. Because he had been in charge of Hitomi for a total of 5 minutes, and had already managed to lose her. She had been crawling for a few months now, proving to be a hassle to keep track of in the enormous house. Who had thought it was a good idea to leave him watching her alone? Well, he did pester Ayami about it until she finally caved and let him watch the toddler on his own while she was working in the kitchen. But he still felt he wasn't to blame. "How's it going in there?" Ayami called from the kitchen. Nori jumped, finally darting across the room, looking under the coffee table and sofas for his sister. Fine," Nori yelped, resorting to yanking cushions off the sofas in hopes of finding Hitomi hiding underneath. Ayami slowed her stirring, knowing Nori's guilty voice all too well. She sighed, setting aside her batter and walking into the living room, sagging in exasperation at the sight of the disarray that took hold of the once pristine room. Nori dropped the cushion in his hands, guiltily looking around at the mess he made. He scratched the back of his head. Well, I can explain this. You lost her, didn't you?" Nori looked down to his feet, nodding meekly. "Bark, bark." The woman and child jumped, sharing a startled look, before dashing off to the origin of the noise. Nori's sock-clad feet slid as he stopped in front of their gaming room. Ayami much more elegantly walked up to the room behind the boy. They both paused to take in what was in front of them, unsure of what to do, or if they should even do something at all. 𝗳𝗏𝗄 was sitting a few feet away from the large flat-screen television, somehow having managed to turn it on. Her curled tail was stiff as a board, and her ears remained pinned in place, pointing at the TV. The program on, at the moment, was an animal documentary about lions. Bark, bark, bark. 𝐼𝐚𝐼 and Nori jumped as 𝗳𝗏𝗄 yipped once more, glaring heatedly at the lions on screen. Her barks were tiny and high-pitched, sounding more instinctual than deliberate. 𝗚𝗚𝗏 couldn't help but giggle, dearly wishing she had grabbed something to film the scene in front of her with. Alas, she had left her phone sitting on the counter in her haste. Nori, after finally calming down from finding her, walked further into the room and picked up the remote. Instead of turning it off, he quickly pressed a few of the numbered buttons in a pattern he had memorized. 𝗳𝗏𝗄's tiny frame jolted in surprise when the lions disappeared, being replaced by the bright and fast colors of their local news channel. Just as he expected, silver and gold were being covered, as Nori had learned this channel held a soft spot for his parents. He sat down beside his sister, taking on the same position as her, staring up at the TV. 𝗚𝗏𝗏 sat down on the couch behind them, enjoying the calm moment. The news anchor was talking a mile a minute about the latest deed the two pro heroes had pulled off, excitedly ranting about how the two easily handled a serious hostage situation by themselves before anyone else could arrive. While Nori and 𝗚𝗏𝗏 were smiling proudly, 𝗳𝗏𝗄 sat stock still. Her eyes were locked on the fast-moving images of her mother and father. While she was too young to recognize the two on screen were her parents, they looked familiar enough to bring on a sense of calm and cause her body to relax. As she watched, her tail slowly began wagging, hard enough to shake her pink onesie-clad frame. She slowly picked up on a familiar word that continued to be repeated. 𝐻𝐸. Nori's head snapped to the right, eyes wide as he watched his sister's mouth move soundlessly. 𝗚𝗏𝗏 practically leapt off the couch, coming to kneel beside her charges. Up until this point, the closest 𝗳𝗏𝗄 had ever come to talking was whining, growling, and barking. It even got to the point where Naomi and Riku took her to their personal doctor to check that she had human vocal cords and not, in fact, canine ones. 𝗳𝗏𝗄's mouth continued to move wordlessly, a crease forming between her round orange brows as she struggled with making the sound she wanted. Hi. Nori grinned, his unusually sharp canines showing. She's. 𝗚𝗏𝗏 quickly shushed him, not wanting him to potentially distract his sister. 𝗳𝗏𝗄's eyes moved back up to the screen. The familiar-looking heroes were now shaking hands with others, clearly getting congratulations on the job well done. The word was repeated again, and with renewed effort, she forced her lips to shape her voice. Hero. She finally managed, getting close enough to the word to be happy with it. Nori froze, while 𝗚𝗏𝗏 lit up. Did you hear that? She said hero. Naomi and Riku will love this. 𝗚𝗏𝗏 gushed, picking up the baby and carrying her out of the room, planning to put her on the phone with her parents and try to get her to say it again. Nori was left stunned, still kneeling on the ground in front of the television. The news was now white noise as he was trying to rein in the swirling thoughts in his head. She said hero. Why did she say hero? He didn't like this. It gave him a sour feeling in his stomach. No, he was just reading too much into this, that's it. After all, babies just repeat the noises and words they hear the most, right? So she probably just heard hero said one too many times. No big deal. He nodded to himself reassuringly, slowly getting to his feet and following after his nanny. Everything would be fine, just as long as 𝗳𝗏𝗄 never became a pro hero, and never put herself in that kind of danger. He winced, too many memories of his parents' nursing injuries coming to mind. 𝗚𝗏𝗏𝗏. I like all of them, Nori sighed, running a hand through his shoulder-length hair. You can't pick all of them, 𝗳𝗏𝗄. You have to pick one. 4 years had passed since 𝗳𝗏𝗄's arrival into the world. In that time, she had proven to be just as troublesome as her brother. The only difference was, she never did any of it on purpose. While her brother purposefully caused mischief at every turn, 𝗳𝗏𝗄 tended to try and stay in line. But more often than not, her happy and excitable nature always caused something to go wrong at one point or another. The 4-year-old girl pouted, turning back to the shelf of stuffed dolls in front of her. They weren't any normal plushes sitting on the shelf, they were dolls of pro heroes. All Might, Endeavor, and so on. There was even some of the new and harder-to-find releases, like Gang Orca and Vlad King. 𝗳𝗏𝗄 hummed, eyes going over the pile one more time before she decided. The choice was easy once she narrowed it down and thought about it. She grabbed 2 dolls. She turned to her brother, holding the dolls to her chest. Can I pick 2? Nori sighed, not looking at the ones she picked as he was focused playing his well-used game. Mama and Papa said, but they're always together. Can't get one and not the other. 𝗳𝗏𝗄 argued. Nori blinked as he looked up. What are you talking about? He trailed off, seeing the familiar colors on the dolls. One was wearing a black mask and golden cloak, while the other had on a pink and silver leotard. Both had matching utility belts and metallic combat boots. They were plush, chibi versions of their parents. Both were roughly 6 inches, though the plush Golden Geist was a couple centimeters taller. Nori couldn't help but spot the inaccuracy, Naomi being just a hair taller than her husband. Hitomi held the Silver Shifter and Golden Geist plushies to her chest, staring up at Nori with her literal puppy dog eyes. The boy crumbled, mainly because their parents were romantic saps and would completely agree that it would be wrong to separate the dolls. Nori sighed. Fine, yeah, let's go find Ayami. Nori put his game away and took Hitomi's hand. He paid for the dolls and stepped outside, hand in hand with his sister. The two started walking to the farmer's market, knowing Ayami was getting groceries. Neither child was concerned about being without an adult, not with Nori's natural control over his quirk. As they passed by a window showcasing TVs, Hitomi started dragging her feet, eyes straining and remaining locked on what was flashing across the screens. Nori noticed she stopped. Hitomi, come on. He tugged on her hand. Hitomi didn't say anything, and just continued looking at the display. After not getting an answer, Nori looked over at the televisions too. He smiled as soon as he recognized the heroes on screen. She breathed. Nori nodded, swelling with pride. Yep. Hitomi's eyes lit up as the on-screen silver took down 2 villains easily, while gold was distracting the others with illusions. Naomi and Riku always made it a point to try and keep the violent part of their work lives out of their personal ones. The news was rarely ever on while they were off at work, as a result. So it was the first time in a while that the girl was seeing her parents in action while old enough to understand what and who she was watching, and something about it. Nori, how does someone become a hero? Nori jumped, looking down at his sister in shock and apprehension. Oh, well, he stammered. If he was being honest with himself, he didn't want to explain that to her, in case she wound up as one of those little weirdos who would rave about becoming a pro as soon as they got their quirk. He had realized he didn't want the hero life for her the second she said her first word. It was dangerous, and so many things could happen. So many horrible things. He gulped as a horrifying image came to mind, of his sister broken and mangled. Sometimes he hated his quirk, not just for its macabre nature, but because it came with drawbacks. An unfortunate side effect was that if he was scared and closed his eyes, he would always be met with an image of what was scaring him, as vivid as the real thing. Even he wasn't safe from the nightmares he created. Feeling a tugging on his hand, Nori shook the thoughts away and looked questioningly at his sister. She was looking up at him in worry, and he realized he was probably silent for too long. Ask Mama and Papa when we get back, okay? He placated. She nodded hesitantly. Taking one more glance at the TVs, the sight of her parents handcuffing the villains filled her with some unfamiliar feeling. It was warm, and almost felt like falling, but in a good way. That day was the start of something unavoidable. The rest of the evening, Hitomi spent asking any question about heroes she could think of. Can anyone be a hero? Why do you need a license? How do you get a license? How do you get into hero school? How do you train your quirk? How do I train my quirk? It was cute at first, and Riku had been more than eager to teach his daughter the ins and outs of heroing. But it slowly became clear she had more questions than they probably did answers, which was saying something. What did you do? Naomi hissed, stabbing her chopsticks into her dinner violently. Nori glared, affronted. Me, it's your fault for being on TV. Naomi gave him a warning look. Watch it. And you were the one who let her pass the damn TVs. Language, dear. Riku faintly chastised, getting a venomous glare in return. It's probably a phase. Hitomi will stop asking questions eventually. Ayami added softly. No, I won't. Hitomi plainly stated over her own food. Riku and Naomi traded a look. Hitomi, what is with the sudden interest? Riku asked kindly. The Pinkette looked down at her dinner, face flushing as she suddenly became bashful, mumbling something. Naomi's ears quickly turned into that of a bat's, moving and now sitting atop her head. What was that? Hitomi mumbled again, and Naomi's eyes widened. What do you mean I don't know? Nori's jaw fell open as he dropped his chopsticks. You mean to tell me she's been spouting off questions like a crazy person for no reason? I have a reason. Hitomi defended herself. Then what is it? Riku asked. Hitomi's ears drooped. I dunno. Nori made a sort of strangled noise, slamming his face on the table. Well, whatever reason it may be, I think it's great Hitomi's interested in something. Riku stated optimistically. Whatever. Nori mumbled into the wood of the table. Naomi nodded along to her husband's statement. Yeah, and who knows, learning all this information could help her work at a hero agency in the future. Yeah, like costume design, maybe even business management, or... Hitomi zoned out, not wanting to listen as her father listed off every job that had something to do with heroes, all except being a hero. The thought of being anything other than a pro hero filled her with a feeling she didn't like. Her stomach would get a swirly pit at the bottom, same as that time she ate onions for the first time by accident. But whenever she thought about being a hero, she felt light, energetic, and so happy. The thought of helping people, of saving them, it was something she even found herself daydreaming of a lot. Did that mean she wanted to be a hero? Well, what other reason was there for her to be so curious about it? If there was no other reason, then that meant I want to be a hero, she shouted, slamming her hands down excitedly on the table. Everyone at the table fell silent, sharing startled and worried glances. Naomi's brows furrowed. Hito, are you sure? Naomi jumped, looking at her husband in surprise. But Riku was staring at the other Ppnkett at the table, looking more serious than the child was used to. She gulped, giving a sturdy nod. Riku waited a few seconds before smiling. Well, the girl has spoken. She's going to be a hero, he stated. Naomi and Nori gaped, while Ayame and Hitomi seemed stunned. Wa Riku. Naomi stood, staring at her husband and trying to figure out what he was doing. The man shrugged. It's in her blood, Omi. And besides, look in her eyes. Naomi hesitated, before doing as he instructed. Hitomi looked over at her mother, narrowing her eyes. I want to be a hero, she stated, more confident now. Naomi blinked, falling back in her chair as her ears went back to normal. That's the look we had before. Her husband finished for her. Naomi nodded slowly, left speechless that she hadn't seen it sooner. Nori looked back and forth between his parents in disbelief. Growling, he stood, slamming his hands on the table similarly to how Hitomi had. You can't be serious, the boy bemoaned. Naomi crossed her arms. Nori, watch it. No. He cut his mother off. Am I really the only one who cares about Hitomi? Naomi scowled heavily. Of course we care. But who knows, in 10 years she might decide to be an engineer or a doctor instead. But if this is what Hitomi really wants, then it's better to help her than let her do it by herself. Naomi snapped. Nori stared down at the table, hands shaking at his sides. She's 4, and we don't even know what she can do. The boy muttered. Well, we'll figure it out, Riku said optimistically. Nori slowly looked up, wincing at the glossiness of his sister's eyes. Do you really want to be a hero? He asked his sister. Hitomi hesitated at her brother's tone, before nodding vehemently. Nori sighed, dropping back into his seat. With their food now cold and long forgotten, the family decided to play some board games instead, to try to lighten the mood, easily falling into a peaceful atmosphere. But while he backed down this time, Nori definitely wasn't done trying to steer Hitomi away from the career path of heroism. Hitomi sat silently, picking at a loose string on her blue kindergarten uniform. It was currently snack time and the majority of the children were all sitting together and talking animatedly. Usually the small Ppnkett would be contributing to the noise of the classroom, but she didn't have it in her to be upbeat at the time. Ever since the night she declared she wanted to be a hero, something had been nagging her. What was her quirk? Sure, she knew she had some form of a mutation quirk, but so far, the only abilities she seemed to possess was heightened senses. And the fact she hadn't yet showed any sign of something else made her worry that there was nothing else. And if that was the case, how could she ever be a hero? A timid tap on her shoulder startled Hitomi out of her thoughts. The Ppnkett turned to look at who wanted her attention, and was incredibly surprised upon seeing who it was. A girl she had never talked to personally, but who Hitomi knew to be the smartest girl in the class, was fidgeting slightly, a faint blush dusting her cheeks. Her onyx eyes refused to stay locked with Hitomi's pink ones. The girl rubbed the back of her neck, causing her spiky black pigtails to swing side to side. I wanted to see if you were okay. Why, you seemed sad. The girl mumbled, the blush turning darker. Hitomi blinked, taken aback by the girl's concern. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. The black-haired girl jumped, not having expected such an energetic response so soon after seeing the Ppnkett's downtrodden mood. Oh, that's good. Hitomi's smile dipped as the girl turned around, walking away. Hey, wait, Hitomi called. The girl stopped, looking sheepishly back at Hitomi. Her tail began to wag, and she gestured for the girl to sit down. "Wanna play with dolls?" Hitomi asked, holding up a few from the classroom's toy box. The black-haired girl's eyes widened. Really? Hitomi nodded surely, patting the carpeted floor next to her. The girl hesitantly sat down, taking the doll Hitomi held out for her. Suddenly, Hitomi smacked her forehead, before holding out her hand. Oh right, I almost forgot. I'm Hitomi Sato. What's your name? The black-haired girl jumped, flushing as she realized she hadn't introduced herself either. She took Hitomi's hand, shaking it gently. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. It's a pleasure to meet you, Momo said sincerely. Hitomi grinned, happy to have met a potential friend. Despite her excitable and happy nature, Hitomi always had trouble making friends, so this brightened her day. For all of 2 seconds, while the two girls were introducing themselves, a boy with spiky electric blue hair and elvish ears snuck up behind them, taking advantage of their teacher's short absence. His impish grin had a sort of malicious look behind it, and as he pulled a toy pail out from behind his back, it became clear why. The girls were just letting go of each other's hands when the boy dumped the pail's contents over Momo. The girl squealed as cold water cascaded down her frame, soaking her uniform. Hitomi froze, smile vanishing as she watched the other girl start shivering. The elvish boy started cackling. holding his sides and falling on his behind while wheezing for air. As soon as Momo started tearing up, Hitomi finally got past her shock. The more she looked at Momo, the more she started feeling warm. No, warm wasn't right. She felt hot. She felt like her skin was sizzling, and she realized why. Oh, she thought to herself, I'm angry. Do you see the look on her face? That was awesome. The boy cheered to his friends as he got to his feet. It wasn't the first time he had targeted his classmates for some cruel prank or joke, but it was most likely going to be his last. Hitomi numbly stood, turning to her bag and fishing out the lilac cardigan her mother packed her. Here, she murmured, carefully draping it over Momo's shaking shoulders. The girl looked up, tears on her lashes, at Hitomi. But before she could say anything, the Pinkette was spinning on her heels, marching up to the still laughing boy. Hitomi's body, tensed and coiled for action, didn't feel entirely her own. It was almost like she was a machine, moving on autopilot as she charged towards the bully. What happened next was a shock to every person in the room, and would forever be remembered by a few. While the boy was distracted, wiping away the mirthful tears in his blue eyes as he stood, he didn't see Hitomi step in front of him, but he did feel her tackle him back to the ground. The classroom erupted into a sea of shouts as they all watched Hitomi's tiny fists come down on the boy over and over. Momo gaped, moving to stand on her feet, clinging to the cardigan. Sato, stop. But she wasn't listening, and over the sound of everyone yelling, either cheering or calling for mercy, a deep growling could be heard. As the boy started fighting back, trying to use his quirk, Momo turned to a fellow classmate. Get a teacher, she demanded, hoping to salvage the situation and keep Hitomi from being punished for defending her. The cobalt-haired boy nodded, darting out the room to do just that, speeding away with the use of his quirk, the exhausts on his calves rumbling behind him. Everyone's shouts started to die down, as Hitomi's fists stalled, trembling in the air as they hung above the boy. And while she may have stopped punching, her frame still shook in fury. Her growls got louder, becoming deeper, to the point it almost sounded like an engine running. The boy panted underneath her, nose dripping blood. He tried keeping up a vicious glare, but it slowly crumbled into a dumbfounded stare as something started happening to the girl pinning him down. As Hitomi began shaking harder, it became clear that it wasn't from anger anymore, but something else. Everyone paled when Hitomi's uniform started ripping, as she grew too big for it. What's going on? The teacher demanded as she barreled into the room. The woman's jaw dropped and she paled at the sight of her once smallest student. Hitomi herself was now confused. Everyone was staring at her, and everything to her now felt different. It was scaring her. She looked down at the boy she had pinned, but froze as she saw herself. Oh, so that's her quirk. The Sato household was in a peaceful silence. Nori and Hitomi were both in school. Riku was at the agency, and Naomi was keeping herself busy by crocheting one of her agents a baby blanket. The quiet was broken, however, when the shrill ringing of the home phone echoed throughout the house. Naomi sighed, putting down the blanket. That honestly looked more like a sheet of tangled yarn. She wandered into the kitchen, finding Ayami already there. The older woman held up a hand, silently saying she'd take the call. She picked it up, abruptly cutting off the ringing. Hello, yes, hello Mrs. Sato. I'm calling about your daughter. Naomi blinked in surprise. Hitomi, what happened? Well, it would seem she learned how to activate her quirk. Naomi froze, almost dropping the phone. Before she could bombard the teacher with questions, she was talking once again. And we need your help. Turning it off. Ayami, get my keys. After a tense 10-minute drive, Naomi was practically kicking down the doors of the private kindergarten. Mrs. Sato, where is she? Naomi cut the teacher off, storming up to her. The skittish woman nodded, meekly pointing down the hallway. Right this way. As the woman led them to Hitomi's classroom, Naomi restrained herself from asking any questions about her daughter's quirk, wanting to see it for herself. Once they entered the classroom, Naomi peered around, trying to spot her daughter. However, all she found was a group of 4- and 5-year-olds huddled around and staring up at. Naomi stiffly walked over, the children parting from her path and giving her a better look at her daughter. But if it weren't for the fluffy ears and curled tail, she probably would have needed to be told the situation. Naomi slowly put a gentle hand in her daughter's new fur, staring back at her mother, now at equal height, with her bright pink eyes now faded to a deep purple, was Hitomi. Hitomi, who now seemed to be an 𝗂𝐸𝐴. Not just any 𝗂𝐴 though, especially not at her almost 6-foot height. Hitomi wasn't even 4 feet tall to begin with. Naomi thought hysterically. Naomi took a calming breath, knowing she needed to calm her daughter down before anything else, going off of the trembling underneath her soft fur. Do you know how you did this? Naomi softly asked. Hitomi gave a slow shake of her head. Do you know how to turn back? A high-pitched whine was her answer. Naomi sighed, looking up at her daughter in concern. She didn't know how to handle this. If she barged in the classroom and saw Hitomi with goat horns and beaver teeth, she could handle that. But this, Naomi had never even gotten close to a full body transformation, and now she had to talk her terrified daughter through one. That was when Naomi noticed the tattered remains of Hitomi's uniform hanging off of her now much larger form. Great, once she did turn back, she would be naked? Great. A light tug on her pencil skirt brought Naomi's attention down to a shivering girl. It was my fault. Sato was defending me, the girl timidly declared. Naomi's eyes softened, noting the lilac cardigan over the girl's shoulders. But that begged the question. Defending you from what? Naomi asked suspiciously. The teacher jolted. Well, that was the other reason we called. Naomi raised a brow, and the teacher gestured to the corner of the room. When she looked, Naomi's arms fell from their crossed position. A boy with light blue hair was sitting in the corner, glaring daggers at her daughter. But what was more pressing was the bloody nose, split lip, and bruising black eye the boy was sporting. Naomi winced, slowly turning back to Ayami, silently asking for her help. The red-eyed woman only shrugged, still staring worriedly at her charge. After sighing, Naomi put a comforting hand on the black-haired girl's shoulder, offering her a smile as well. Hitomi will be just fine, so don't worry, okay? The girl gave a shaky nod, before handing Naomi her daughter's cardigan. "'Cause her uniform's ripped," she murmured. Naomi smiled, giving the girl's shoulder a pat in thanks. "So what are you going to do?" the teacher questioned. Naomi hummed, placing her hands on her hips, still figuring that out. "Come on, Ayami, let's get her home." The white-haired woman nodded, walking over and giving a few comforting pets to her younger charge's head. Wait, we still need to talk about." As she was leading her wobbling daughter out the classroom, Naomi lazily held up a hand. "It's clear my daughter was standing up for a friend. And besides, we don't know how her quirk affects her emotions or impulse control. I think me and my husband will handle this at home." Naomi challenged over her shoulder. The teacher sputtered, But Naomi and Ayami were already out the door, giant Akita in tow. Only then did Naomi realize. "Ayami, how are we going to fit Hitomi in the car?" The last thing Nori expected to see as he and his father walked through the door was a massive Akita Inu. But here we are. Naomi. Riku called his wife, tense with his eyes locked on the giant dog. The Pinkette calmly walked into the room, not looking at all concerned over the beast. When did we get a dog?" Riku stammered as he and Nori carefully walked around the Akita. Naomi put her hand to her chin, pretending to ponder on it. About 4 years ago." Riku dumbly replied. But Nori was quicker on the uptake. He gasped, dropping his school bag. "She got her quirk." Naomi smiled, nodding in confirmation. Riku's eyes widened, as he too now noticed the familiar ears and curled tail. "When? How did this happen?" he asked excitedly. Hitomi, at this point bored of just sitting there, stood up and shakily making her way through the living room and into the kitchen. Naomi shrugged. "She was fighting a bully when it happened. That's all I know." Riku nodded while the three leisurely followed Hitomi's swinging tail. "I see. I'm assuming she can't talk." Naomi hummed in confirmation. "If I'm being perfectly honest, I have no clue on how to help her change back," the woman lamented. Riku put a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. "I'm sure she'll be fine. If she instinctively changed into this form, then I'm sure she'll instinctively change back." "But what if she doesn't?" Nori asked in concern. Just then, a loud and heavy thump was heard from the kitchen. Riku, Naomi, and Nori all ran to check what happened, finally realizing Hitomi had wandered off while they were talking. Naomi immediately assumed the worst. "Ayami, what's..." She cut herself off, as the family watched the white-haired woman carefully drape a blanket over Hitomi's naked body. The nanny sighed. She stumbled in, then she just fell asleep. Ayami told them incredulously. Riku walked over, gently picking his daughter up, attempting not to stir her. But he realized the effort was moot, as Hitomi seemed dead to the world. "It must have tuckered her out," Naomi theorized. Riku nodded. "It makes sense. Keeping herself at such a large form, and using up however much energy it needed had to have taken its toll." For a moment, they all wordlessly watched Hitomi sleep, wrapped in a blanket and curled up in her father's arms. Now that the stress of helping her daughter was gone, Naomi finally took note of something. "Riku, that's the quirk of a hero." Riku paused his gentle rocking, looking up at his wife. "Yes, I suppose it is." He chuckled. Nori stood back, swallowing thickly at his parents' words. How was he supposed to stop her now? Now that she had such a quirk, she would definitely be emboldened by it. But then again, maybe with a quirk like this, she could protect herself and keep herself safe. At the emergence of his sister's quirk, Nori felt better and worse all at once. Transformation, Naomi nodded eagerly, getting another mug out of a cabinet. It was well into the night, but that didn't stop her from getting a cup of coffee. "You should have seen her, kid. She was taller than me. We had to rent a pickup truck just to get her home," she excitedly whispered. A weary sigh came from her guest, his tired eyes staring at her, unamused. "You can't keep calling me kid for forever, you know." Naomi shrugged unabashedly. blowing on her steaming coffee. Not like you can stop me. Another sigh, as he was handed his own mug full of the dark liquid. How does Nori feel about it? I always got the impression he didn't care for heroes. He took a sip, before sardonically tagging on, no offense. Naomi rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Yeah, he's definitely not the biggest supporter of Hitomi right now, but I think he's just worried. And Hitomi, what about her? He rolled his eyes. Is she even more determined to be a pro, now that she got her quirk? Naomi turned sheepish. Well, she hasn't said anything to us, because she hasn't actually woken up yet. Two tired eyes narrowed. What? Don't worry, she's fine. Naomi hurriedly amended. It just really exhausted her. She poured herself another cup. You can stop by tomorrow, see her for yourself. He sighed at her lack of subtlety. You know that's a bad idea. There's a reason I only visit at night, while they're asleep. Naomi pouted, looking down at the counter. Yeah, whatever. You're taking this whole stealth hero thing way too seriously. I just want my kids to get to know my favorite student. It's got nothing to do with being a stealth hero. And I was your only student. He grumbled under his breath. Naomi ignored him, giving a sly grin instead. Anywho, how's Emmy? His eye twitched. Why would I know? Naomi furrowed her brows heavily. Kid, pretending like she isn't head over heels for you isn't gonna help. And humoring her, thus leading her on, won't help either. Humoring her. Naomi giggled. Is that a pun? Groaning under his breath, he glowered at the pinkette. Why do I put up with you? 'Cause I'm awesome. Naomi hummed as she glanced at the time. It's getting late. You should probably head home and get some sleep. Setting his empty mug down, he raised a brow. You invite me over, give me coffee, then tell me to leave and get some rest. Yes, he sighed, but he'd be lying if he said there wasn't any fondness to it. Fine, tell your sane half I said hello. Naomi smiled at him as he stood. I'll be sure to tell Riku that my favorite student said hi. He opened the door, half-heartedly glaring at her over his shoulder. Only student. Naomi shrugged, eyeing him with something like a maternal look in her gaze. Yeah, well that still means you're my favorite. Be safe. He gave a lazy wave over his shoulder, closing the door behind him. Maybe she wasn't cut out for hero work. That's what Hitomi thought to herself as she laid in the grass, exhausted and panting. But she almost immediately shut that thought down. 3 years had passed since she obtained her quirk. 3 years of rigorous training from her parents. You want to be a hero, they'd ask, then work for it. This would always be punctuated with an attack at the end, though they did have their limits. If Hitomi was sick, or too sore from the previous day's training, they would take a break. And if Hitomi couldn't keep her form up after a while, they would stop for the day. They wanted to help her achieve her goal, but were still careful about pushing her, not wanting to negatively affect the girl. Early on, it became clear Hitomi needed 2 things to be able to properly transform: a full stomach, and at least 8 hours of sleep. If she didn't have those 2 things, she could never hold her form for longer than 15 minutes at the maximum, before she would fall unconscious for the rest of the day. Come on, Hitomi. We're not finished yet. The Akita girl nodded, shakily standing up on all fours. Riku grinned, him being the one in charge of training her for the day. Good. Now let's work on your speed and accuracy. Hitomi watched as an army of red balloons appeared, all floating several feet above her now 6.5-foot height. Pop as many as you can, Riku told her, holding up a stopwatch. You've got 1 minute. Hitomi nodded, unable to answer him vocally. As soon as the click was heard, she was jumping up into the air, snapping at and popping the balloons. This form of training always felt odd to her. Her father's illusions had no mass, so anytime she touched one, it felt like nothing. So while it looked and sounded like she was popping balloons with her razor-sharp teeth, to her it felt like biting air. And time. Hitomi had managed to pop one last balloon before it was too late, time running out before her paws even touched the ground. 46. Better than last time, Riku praised. Hitomi's tail involuntarily wagged. You guys done yet? The father and daughter turned, met with the sight of Nori, who was impatiently tapping his foot. Riku grinned. I think so, unless Tomi wants to keep it up. Her tail stilled. The man chuckled, gesturing for the Akita girl to go inside. Nori stepped aside, letting his massive sister through the door. The 13-year-old sighed, walking further into their enormous backyard. Riku raised a brow, planning to train. Nori gave a noncommittal grunt. Riku smirked. It wouldn't happen to be because you want to impress your teacher, would it? Nori froze, face turning a deep red. Riku chuckled, still finding his son's crush to be highly humorous. Not long after Hitomi started her training, Nori took a surprising interest in honing his own quirk. Naomi and Riku were hit with an idea, and reached out to a friend of theirs. A certain friend who happened to share a similar quirk to Nori's. To the couple's glee, she had readily agreed. Now, every Sunday, Nori would be tutored by 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝐻, also known as the R-rated hero, Midnight. Despite the title, the woman always kept herself strictly PG when in the presence of the Sato children, revealing herself to be great with kids over the many hours training Nori. Inside the house, Hitomi carefully walked up the stairs, entering her room before changing back to her human form. After she was done putting back on her clothes, she raced downstairs and darted into the kitchen. "Can I go to Momo's now?" Hitomi pleaded, energetically bouncing on her heels. Naomi and Ayami shared an amused look over the dishes they were hand-washing. "Did you finish training?" "Yes." Naomi shrugged. "Well, okay then, but we'll need to be back in a few hours to get the party ready." While her daughter cheered, the woman grabbed her keys. The party Naomi was referring to was the annual Pro Hero Get-Together, hosted every December by the Sato family. It was a good chance for new and old heroes to connect and swap stories, and there had even been a few deals between agencies stricken up years past. It was an equal opportunity for pros and up-and-comers alike, so it had grown to be a rather important fixture for the local hero community. Ever since the water incident and Hitomi's discovery of her quirk, Momo and the Pinkette had grown inseparable. After her revenge on the blue-haired boy, everyone was too fearful of her to talk to Hitomi, let alone be friends with her. All except Momo. And with Momo's self-conscious attitude, nobody wanted to be friends with her either. All except Hitomi. So in the end, the two were ignored by the majority of their classmates. All of those factors took the two's unlikely friendship and made it as strong as steel. They were more like sisters than anything else now, really. The friendship was definitely unlikely, the two being total opposites. Hitomi was loud, excitable, brash, and outgoing. Momo was poised, calm, intelligent, and self-conscious. The two were nothing alike, but they worked well with each other. It was a good balance, and a great friendship, one that was sure to last a lifetime. "What are you gonna wear?" Hitomi asked, head hanging upside down over Momo's bed. The Ravenet hummed thoughtfully. "Well, I have plenty of dresses. I suppose we'll see what my mother picks later." Hitomi righted herself, crossing her arms and resting her head on them. "Your mom's picking for you." Again, Momo nodded, focusing on practicing her quirk. She was currently pulling a seemingly endless rope out of her left bicep. "But I thought you wanted to pick your dress." Momo nodded again, reaching up and wiping the sweat accumulating on her brow. "I did, but mother didn't like the one I picked." Hitomi frowned, pushing herself up off of the bed. "Do you have it?" Momo finally looked up. "Have what?" "The dress," Hitomi said in an obviously tone. Momo paused, pulling on the rope. Yes, it's in my closet." Hitomi nodded, immediately walking over and opening the door, entering her friend's walk-in closet. What are you doing?" Momo asked in concern. Instead of answering her question, Hitomi stuck her head out of the door, pointed out to me. Momo hesitantly got to her feet, the last of the rope falling out of her arm. She walked in behind the Pinkette, before taking a hanger off of the wall and holding it out for her friend to see. The dress was a plain sky blue, no glitter, sequins, and no unnecessary layers either. And as she took a closer look, Hitomi spotted pockets. It was a miracle Mrs. Yaoyorozu even bought the dress. The shorter girl's eyes were practically sparkling. "I chose comfort over appearance," Momo said sheepishly, as if it were something to be embarrassed about. Suddenly, Hitomi looked up into the slightly taller girl's eyes, a determined gleam shining within the sea of pink. "You are wearing this dress," Hitomi sternly declared. Momo sputtered, quickly putting a hand over her mouth to mask the unladylike reaction. What? Why?" "Because it looks comfortable and will be adorable on you," the Pinkette said with a straight face. Momo flushed, looking down at the dress in her hands. "My mother won't. Mrs. Yaoyorozu can suck an egg," Hitomi shouted fearlessly, arms pumping up into the air, getting a scandalized look from Momo. "Wear the dress that you want to. You look pretty in everything," the girl continued heatedly. Momo's eyes softened, suddenly understanding why her friend was so adamant on this. Something that had changed in Hitomi with the emergence of her quirk was a sudden and ferocious appetite. Now, to keep up with her body's new metabolism, she had to eat a lot. And while the training helped, the change in her diet had left Hitomi a little plump. Not to mention, ever since she transformed for the first time, she had slowly been becoming stronger. Dense muscle packed on steel like bones, on her legs especially. Despite all of this, the girl wasn't overweight by any means, but she was definitely bigger than Momo herself, and as a result, often couldn't wear things the Ravenet could fit into. Hitomi had at first handled it as she normally would, her confidence unwavering. But, after overhearing so many whispers, and seeing so many contemptuous smirks from the petite girls in their class, the Pinkette slowly but surely lost her confidence in her physical appearance. Momo hated it. What kind of children make fun of each other's weight? The Ravenet found it deplorable. Both of the children and the parents, who had undoubtedly instilled the behavior into the kids from the power of example. The combination of not wanting to upset her friend and wanting to decide something for herself had Momo gripping the dress tightly. She stormed out of her closet, then her room, leaving Hitomi stunned and confused. Not 2 minutes later, Momo came back, face flushed. She set the dress down on her bed. I told my mother that I was going to wear this dress, not the one that she decided, Momo explained, still catching her breath from sprinting back up to her room. Hitomi beamed. That's great. What'd she say? Momo paused. She said go to your room. The girls were silent until Hitomi began giggling hysterically. It's not funny. I think I'm in trouble, Momo lamented. Hitomi reined in her giggling, pointing at Momo dramatically. Good. It's not normal for a kid to be as professional as you. Momo sagged. No offense, but as someone who gets in a slew of trouble regularly, I don't think I should take your advice. Hitomi gasped dramatically, pretending to be hurt by her words. But anyway, she dropped the act. You're still wearing that dress. Momo sighed in exasperation, but couldn't convincingly hide her smile. Hitomi always hated these things, especially because they were always hosted at their own house. And she knew Nori felt the same way. Hey, you think you can use your quirk and then bite my head off? I think that might be more fun. Nori whined. Hitomi grimaced. Alright, fine. How about you step on and crush me instead? Hitomi pondered this for a second. That's enough, you two, Naomi warned, finishing putting Hitomi's hair in a bun. The woman stepped back, checking her work. The older Ppinket was dressed in an expensive black gown, her own hair done up in a fancier version of her daughter's, and she used the advantage of the floor-length dress to wear flats instead of heels. Well, don't they look dapper? Riku cheerily exclaimed as he walked into the room. He was dressed in a simple tuxedo with a gold silk bow tie. Nori was wearing basically a smaller version of his father's tux, with his dreadlocks pulled back and out of his face in a ponytail. Hitomi was wearing a lilac dress, customized to have a small hole to let her tail out. Her hair was done in a simple and small bun at the base of her head, as well as her bangs being held back with a lilac headband. Naomi gave them all one last once-over, before nodding in approval. I think we're ready. Nori raised his hand. My mental stability isn't ready. Naomi ignored her son, walking out to confirm Ayami was ready too. If she was, then it was time to start. By the time it was dark, the Sato household was holding more people than they had ever entertained before, the recent boost in heroes making it actually feel crowded for once, leaving the hosts with their hands full trying to keep up enough pleasantries and small talk for everyone. Luckily for Nori and Hitomi, they didn't have to deal with any of the adults, as all of the heroes that came who had kids had been encouraged to bring them. Hitomi easily found Momo, grinning like a maniac when she saw the Ravenet wearing her chosen dress. Nori, on the other hand, found and gained the attention of two of the older Todoroki siblings. Hitomi was surprised they were even there, as it was usually only the youngest Todoroki brought to these things. Hitomi stayed away from them, though. She always got a bad feeling from Enji Todoroki. Well, that was her plan. It didn't last long. The Ppinket was humming along to the piano music Ayami was playing. In her hands she held 2 cupcakes meant for Momo and herself, but while she was walking back to her friend, she spotted something. She immediately identified him as a Todoroki, due to his mix of snow white and maroon hair. But what made her stop was the painful-looking bruise marring his cheek, as if he had recently been struck, and definitely not lightly. Not just that, but there was a sort of deadened look in his eyes. Hitomi's brows furrowed in concern, and she found herself moving towards the lone boy. She walked up behind him without his notice. These things aren't very fun, are they? He flinched, spinning around and looking at her warily. Hitomi ignored the standoffish feeling coming from him and instead offered a large smile. I'm Hitomi Sato, she declared proudly, transferring the second cupcake to her left hand before holding her right one out for him to shake. It's nice to meet you. The boy blinked, staring at her like she was insane. Shouto Todoroki, the boy monotonously replied, reluctantly shaking her hand. Hitomi beamed, having feared she wouldn't get a response. Why aren't you over by your siblings? She inquired, tipping her head over to where Nori could be seen having a contest on who could drink the most punch the fastest with a boy with a head of pure white hair. Shouto's eyes narrowed. Why do you care? Hitomi frowned softly. 'Cause you look lonely. Shouto froze, once again staring at her strangely, but still found himself talking to her. I wanted to be alone, he said lowly, and part of him even believed what he was saying. Hitomi looked at him skeptically. You don't sound very convincing, she stated bluntly. Shouto blinked, wrong-footed, before glowering at her. It's the truth. Hitomi gave him a shrug, relenting. If you say so. But if at some point you want to not be alone, you can come find me. With that, she put her cupcake in his hands, turning on her heel and marching away. Shouto watched her as she weaved between the massive costumed bodies, disappearing and leaving him to wonder why on her earth she had bothered to come and talk to him in the first place. Suddenly, a flickering shadow fell over him from behind. Do you know who that was? Shouto clenched his teeth, glaring down to the floor. That was Silver Shifter and Golden Geist's daughter. I hear she has a promising quirk. Enji Todoroki continued. Shouto stiffened, a sick feeling coming over him at what his father was implying. I think I'm going to go find our hosts. The heat on Shouto's back disappeared, and as he stared down at the cupcake in his hands, he mentally apologized to the Ppinket for whatever was about to happen. You pig. The enraged shout was accentuated by a sharp slap ringing out. Hitomi and Momo immediately looked up, recognizing the voice to be Naomi. The entire room fell silent, as everyone turned to look at what was happening. Riku was now holding his wife back, though he himself looked ready to lash out. Naomi panted, clutching her burned palm to her chest. Standing in front of the couple stood the fuming Endeavor. "Leave, now," Naomi growled, sounding like a threatened lioness. The second-place hero glared at the two, a red mark blooming across his left cheek. After a few tense seconds, Endeavor turned, fire billowing behind him. Everyone in his way parted to let him pass. All the Todoroki children followed after him without a word. As he passed her, Hitomi gave a hesitant wave to Xiaodo. He ignored her, studiously staring at the floor. When the doors slammed shut behind them, everyone simultaneously looked back at their hosts. Riku gave a sheepish grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think that was enough excitement for one night, don't you think?" Naomi chose to glare at them all instead. The guests got the message and began filing out of the house. Hitomi and Nori got pats on the heads by many leaving. And when the unjustly feared hero, Gang Orca, gently tousled her hair on his way out, Hitomi's eyes were sparkling. Nimuri gave a hug to both children, leaving Hitomi beaming, and Nori a blushing mess. In the background, a tall man wearing mostly black stopped and shared a few hushed words with Naomi and Riku. His perpetually tired eyes swam with concern. And after the situation was quietly explained to him, his gaze flickered to Hitomi, anger now mixed with the previous worry. Momo and Hitomi hugged and reluctantly said goodbye. And the Pinkette was amused to hear that Momo was still in trouble over putting her foot down about the dress. Ayami approached the family after everyone was finally gone, all of them staring at the mess around them. For a party of heroes, the place was typically left in varying states of disarray every time, though it was likely caused by Naomi's overzealous recipe for the grown-up punch that she prepared every year, always forgetting its effect on the guests. Until after it was too late. "We never really remember the fact that we have to clean this up, huh?" Naomi exhaled through her nose harshly. "We're never doing it here again." She got murmurs of agreement. Naomi was sweeping the floor. Riku was picking up the loose garbage. Ayami was cleaning the spilled food and drinks, and Nori was tiredly munching on the leftover hors d'oeuvres. As for Hitomi, she was passed out on top of a table. They weren't entirely sure how she fell asleep there. Nori yawned loudly, jaw popping and eyes watering from the force of it. "Are we done yet?" Naomi gave him an unamused look. "And you're asking because?" Nori raised his head off the table. "Oh yeah, good point. G-Night." The older Pinkette rolled her eyes fondly, and as Nori stood, she held up a hand. "Hold it." Nori groaned. He should have known there was a catch. "Take your sister to her room." Naomi nodded to the miniature Pinkette. As Nori moved to do as instructed, he slowly paused. "Hey mama, why'd you slap Endeavor?" Naomi and Riku both stiffened, sharing quick looks. Nori narrowed his eyes at their behavior. "What did he do?" Naomi couldn't help smile at the defensive tone in her son's voice. "Nothing you need to worry about. I think we made ourselves quite clear." "Clear about what?" Naomi looked over at Riku, silently asking him what they should say. The brunette thought on it, before setting down the half-full trash bag and turning to his son. "Have they taught you about quirk marriages in school?" Riku asked tensely. Nori slowly nodded, not sure where that question came from. Riku crossed his arms. "Endeavor, well, he had a quirk marriage." "Okay, but what does that have to do with?" He suggested his son Xiaodo and Hitomi get betrothed. Naomi cut her son off, glaring intently at the floor. Nori paled, knowing full well what that word meant, then flushed in anger. "That's how your mother felt," Riku said at the look on his son's face. "When we told that bastard no, he implied it would be in Hitomi's best interest. As if she's ever going to have trouble with finding boys? Ha!" She scoffed angrily. "She's precious and adorable and," Naomi hissed, fists tightening on the broom. "Ah, honey," snapped. Naomi blinked, looking down at her polar bear hands and the broken broom in them. "Ayami." "Yeah," the white-haired woman shouted from the kitchen. "I broke another broom." "Naomi." Ayami's voice shouted in reprimand. Riku ran a hand through his hair in fond exasperation. "Anyway, I don't think we'll be seeing any of the Todoroki family again anytime soon." Nori nodded in agreement, not wanting his sister anywhere near them after tonight. "Happy birthday." Hitomi made a sort of squawking noise, rolling away from the origin of the shout and tangling herself up into her blankets as a result. Momo giggled, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The night before, the two had had a sleepover, as they always did the day before one of their birthdays, the tradition holding strong now for years. A muffled voice came from the pillow Hitomi had smashed her face into. "Pardon?" Momo leaned closer. Hitomi turned her head slightly, glaring at Momo with one eye. "What time is it?" Momo smiled sheepishly. 6 in the morning. Hitomi groaned. But look at it this way. You didn't have to train yesterday, so you're not exhausted." Hitomi continued to glare at her friend, but relented only a few moments later. The day was March 20th. Hitomi was officially 8 years old. The two girls sleepily walked down to the kitchen and were immediately greeted enthusiastically by everyone. "Happy birthday!" was shouted by Ricky, Naomi, Nori, and Ayami in unison. Now that 𝐻𝗏𝗄 was officially flustered from the attention, the girls sat at the table, 2 plates of Belgian waffles sliding in front of them. "Thanks, Ayami." 𝗏𝗏𝗄 yawned out. The nanny smiled and shook her head. "This wasn't me, it was Nori." 𝗏𝗏𝗄 and Momo blinked, turning to look at said boy in shock. Nori buried his head in his arms, flustered quite easily for a 15-year-old. "Told you not to tell her." 𝗏𝗏𝗄 grinned, not wasting any more time, and started digging in. Her heart swelled with pride. They were really good. "𝗏𝗏𝗄, we have to tell you something." Naomi started tensely. 𝗏𝗏𝗄 paused her eating, fork halfway to her mouth. Momo stopped as well. "Riku and I, we have to go to an agency today." 𝗏𝗏𝗄's furrowed brow softened. "Oh, that's okay." The two parents blinked. "Really? You're not upset we'll miss your birthday?" Riku asked, sounding somewhat stung. 𝗏𝗏𝗄 shrugged. "You're heroes. Saving people comes first." The two looked at their daughter in silence, before both of them broke out into matching smiles. Riku checked his watch, before nudging his wife's shoulder. "The train leaves in 20. Ayami's brows pinched together, as she raised a mug to her mouth. "Train? What agency are you going to?" "The genius office," Riku casually said. Her eyes widened dramatically. She then proceeded to choke on her tea. "Why, you're working with Best Jeanist today." "Who's Best Jeanist?" Nori asked without any serious investment in the answer, not familiar with the name. "He's a pro who's recently made it big, getting pretty popular with the female demographic," Riku explained, wagging his eyebrows at Ayami teasingly. She flushed and ducked her head. Naomi shrugged, calmly sipping her coffee. "They asked for our help, we said yes." Riku sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck. "But we didn't realize they meant they wanted help today." While the two heroes seemed forthcoming about everything, there was something they weren't telling the table's occupants. Helping the genius office was only one facet of the day's events, though it was arguably the one they were looking forward to more, even though the second job was exceedingly more important. After the family and Momo finished eating, Naomi and Riku hugged their children goodbye, as was the usual ritual before they left for work. Naomi smoothed down 𝗏𝗏𝗄's bed head, rubbing her ears for a second before pulling her into a hug. "We'll be back before it gets dark." "Love you," the older 𝗏𝗃𝗃 softly told her daughter. 𝗏𝗏𝗄 hugged her mother tighter. "Love you, too." Riku and Naomi switched kids, and Riku was now swinging 𝗏𝗏𝗄 around in his arms. The girl giggled, half-heartedly fighting. "We'll miss you so much. You'll only be gone a day, Papa." "That's far too long." The girl giggled again, squeezing her father tightly. "Love you." Riku stopped swinging her, simply holding her to his chest. "Love you, 𝗏𝗏𝗄." Over their children's shoulders, the husband and wife shared a tense look. They had a very bad feeling about today. "This is stupid," 𝗏𝗏𝗄 whined. Momo looked up from her own worksheet. "And why is that?" 𝗏𝗏𝗄 rested her chin on her fist, scowling at the offensive paper on her desk. "I'm gonna be a hero. I don't need to learn all this." Momo looked at the 𝗏𝗃𝗃 strangely. "You know, to get into UA, you have to take tests." "Yeah, and that's why I've been training, Mo. I mean written tests. As in, what's on your worksheet?" 𝗏𝗏𝗄 blinked, slowly looking down at her homework again, a look of betrayal emerging the longer she stared at it. The bell rang, making the girl jump and wince, hands coming up to cover her sensitive ears. All their classmates packed up their things, rushing out the door. Momo sighed at the terrified look on 𝗏𝗏𝗄's face. "You didn't fill out a single question, did you?" 𝗏𝗏𝗄 groaned. Outside, the girls spotted both Momo's driver and Ayami. A quick side hug was shared. "See you tomorrow. Bye. Happy birthday, again." 𝗏𝗏𝗄 hopped into the back of Ayami's car, sharing a smile with Nori, who had been picked up first for once. The drive was silent, save for Ayami's strange mix of pop, anime openings, and classical music playing. When they reached the house, Nori and 𝗏𝗏𝗄 were met with a symphony of smells. The 𝗏𝗃𝗃 immediately recognized them to be her favorite meal and dessert: steak and potatoes with strawberry cake. Food she fell in love with ever since having it when visiting some of Naomi's extended family in America. 𝗏𝗏𝗄 smiled, but despite her best efforts, it came out weak. She thought she would be fine without her parents there, but she was only a child after all, and found herself saddened by their absence. She came to slowly, softly roused by the pitter-patter of rain against her window. Another crack of thunder boomed, proving to be the thing that woke her up in the first place. 𝗏𝗏𝗄's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked owlishly to try and get them to adjust to the dark. Sitting up, she kicked her legs off of her bed, slowly standing and trudging out of her room and through the massive house. As she walked into their large kitchen, her intentions of getting a glass of water were stalled. 11:56 p.m. She blinked, staring at the microwave clock, wondering if it was wrong. She shook her head, ears flopping around as she tried ignoring the pit that was forming in her stomach. Her sock-clad feet made almost no sound as she wandered into their entertainment room. Quietly, she picked up the television remote, turning on the TV, and immediately lowered the volume to avoid waking Ayami or Nori. Her fingers punched in the numbers for the local news channel Naomi and Riku always watched. A flash of bright colors and fast movements caused her to blink rapidly, trying to get a handle on what was being covered. Because she was still slightly dazed from sleep, only a small part of her, somewhere deep in her subconscious, was aware of why she was doing this, why she felt the need to check the news, why it felt like something was missing. Slowly, the fast movements and muffled rants became clearer, and she started taking it in. Found outside. Are unsure who. Hitomi's brows scrunched together as she cocked her head to the side. Heroes helping investigate. Sincere condolences. She didn't understand, not until the next words were spoken. The bodies found have since been confirmed to be the pro heroes 𝗧𝗵𝗧𝗟 and 𝗧𝗵𝗏. The remote slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor noisily. But Hitomi didn't register it, ears ringing as all the color drained from her face. Her mouth filled with blood, and she would later realize it was because she had bitten viciously into her tongue. Hitomi, what are you doing up? Behind the frozen Pinkette, Ayami slowly approached. Having heard the remote hit the floor, she had rushed down to investigate. As Hitomi remained still, back facing the woman, Ayami looked up at the television, hoping to see what was causing her charge's behavior. As her red eyes roved over the scroll at the bottom of the screen, she turned nearly as white as her hair. Breaking news. Pro heroes 𝗧𝗵𝗧𝗟 and 𝗧𝗵𝗏 found dead in an alleyway nearby to the Genius office, agency belonging to pro hero 𝐵𝑆𝑔𝐸𝐝. A loud chime echoed from the antique clock in the corner, breaking Ayami out of her shock. She numbly looked over, stiffening as she saw the time. 12 a.m. That meant Riku and Naomi Sato were killed on March 20th, on their daughter's birthday. A soft chime rang in the silent room. A pink phone covered in pastel cake and candy decoding charms lit up, vibrating on a mahogany bedside table. A head of messy pink locks peeked out of her nest of blankets. Her hand slowly inched out of her cocoon of warmth, reaching lazily for her cell phone. As she brought the screen to her face, she squinted at the brightness, trying to read the message. Mo, where are you? I've already gotten to class. Hitomi blinked, then blinked some more, until the cloud of sleep fogging up her mind disappeared. A choked sort of sound tore its way from her throat, as she ripped her blankets away, scrambling out of bed. The cold air that her bedding fought to keep out washed over her, racking her body in goosebumps. For the next 10 minutes, the Pinkette fumbled around, brushing her hair and putting on her uniform, almost tripping over a stray baton on the floor in her haste. Her and Momo had intended to meet up together at the train station that Momo would arrive at, but Hitomi had clearly overslept, thus ruining that plan. While the raven-haired girl had to commute to school via train, Hitomi was lucky enough to be in walking distance. In an effort to not look like every other female student in UA, Hitomi switched out her regular red tie for a red bow tie, as well as changing out her normal black thigh-high socks for white leggings. Grabbing her phone and lilac backpack, she raced down the stairs and through the living room to the door. Aren't you forgetting something important? Hopping on one foot as she wrestled on her Mary Janes, she looked over her shoulder. Even almost 8 years after her boss's deaths, Ayami was still taking care of the 2 remaining Satos, now as their legal guardian. Her hair was put in 2 low-hanging buns, and she had long ago foregone her maid outfit, instead wearing a normal blouse and jeans. Hitomi pouted thoughtfully, doing a mental checklist before shaking her head. Nope, she chirped obliviously. Ayami raised a thin brow, nodding to the kitchen. The Pinkette looked over and was met with the tired glare of her older brother, now the mature age of 22, as he sat at the island counter, grouchily eating a bowl of cereal. Hitomi blinked, before grinning sheepishly. Oh, right. Have a nice day, Nori. Ayami sighed, face palming. I meant breakfast. Nori waved his sister off, before seeming to realize something. What are you even doing up this early? School doesn't start for another half hour. The redhead grumbled, lazily checking a clock on the wall. I want to be extra early. Besides, Momo's already there. Typical, Nori snorted. Hitomi turned, opening the door. Taking one more look over her shoulder, she gave her brother and guardian a slightly shaky smile. Here I go. Ayami gave her a warm smile, her eyes watering slightly, while Nori looked down at the counter, refusing to meet her gaze. Have a good first day. I'll try. Hug Hana for me when she wakes up. After getting a nod in response, Hitomi took a deep breath, before forcing her shaky legs to start moving. She didn't need a map or anything like that. She knew where to go. After all, she had walked to the building not that long ago. There was a sort of tense look in her eyes as she stared up at the famous school. Her feet slowly walked her through the gate, swarmed on all sides by fellow adolescents. But she wasn't there for the same reason they were. Today was the day for students from all around to try their hand at getting into UA. But Hitomi had no intention of taking the exam. She was only there to get a look at the place and see if she could really go for it. It was kind of funny, really. When she was a kid, it was her life's mission to become a pro hero. But then, her parents lost their lives to that very profession. After that, her spiels about how she would become a hero died off. Any mention of it would only bring up painful memories. Not to mention it always set Nori off. She became withdrawn from anyone who wasn't family or friends, almost never leaving the house, and when she did, it was always for something mandatory, like school. But almost 4 years ago, something had thankfully changed. 𝐼𝐚𝐲 got pregnant. It was a total shock, considering the fact she didn't have a husband, boyfriend, or even a lover. It had come from a one-night stand, and to top it off, she didn't even have the guy's number. At first, the woman was mortified, afraid of what her charges were going to think, but she found herself unable to go to a clinic and put an end to it. It was 2 months into the pregnancy that Hitomi and Nori found out. Hitomi had walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and as she was lifting it up to take a drink, she noticed something. One of Hitomi's quirks was being able to smell things like pregnancy with her heightened senses. And to her surprise, the kitchen smelled strongly of hormonal perspiration. The only reason she even knew the scent and could recognize it was because her math teacher had gone through the same thing not that long ago, still expected to be on maternity leave for another month or so. 𝐼𝐚𝐲. When the woman and Nori both ran into the room in a panic to investigate what caused her sudden shout, Hitomi pointed accusingly at the white-haired woman, practically shrieking, "You're pregnant." After that, the woman reluctantly sat the two down, telling them that, yes, she was pregnant. It was immediately followed by a stern talk about protection, and that the two would just be better off never having sex at all. To say the two siblings were red-faced during and after the lecture would be an understatement. And just like that, it was like a switch had been flipped. Hitomi started getting up earlier, started talking more, started smiling again, because she had something important to look forward to for the first time in forever. Something that had nothing to do with the world of pro heroes. Things only got better when, 7 months later, Hana was born. The tiny baby had to be born by C-section, as her mutation would have caused severe harm to 𝐼𝐚𝐲 if the woman had done it naturally. Hana's mutation was, in Hitomi's opinion, the cutest and coolest thing in the world. She had 2 huge and fluffy brown rabbit ears on her head, and her legs were that of a rabbit's as well, soft and furry with big pawed feet. She had light brown hair, something she must have gotten from whoever fathered her, and bright copper eyes. But Hitomi's favorite part about Hana's mutation was that she had small antelope antlers on her head between her ears, making the baby look like a jackalope. The whole time during 𝐼𝐚𝐲's recovery, Hitomi was right there beside her, ready and eager to help. It really reminded the white-haired woman of when Nori had taken such a huge interest in helping out with Hitomi when she was a baby. Hana had managed to spark something back to life in the Pinkette, until she got her letter. The same one had been also sent out to Momo, telling them both that they had been recommended, and thus had full scholarships into UA. All they needed to do was come down to do a quick written and physical exam, and they would be all set. Momo had been ecstatic, while Hitomi had been numb. In the future, she would appreciate beyond words what her guardian did next. Without discussing a single word about it, 𝐼𝐚𝐲 signed on the dotted line, scheduling the Pinkette's exam. And as an extra measure, she also signed her up at their local gym. 𝐼𝐚𝐲 knew her charge well enough to know that if she was given the chance, she would overcomplicate things in her head, stressing herself out before even giving it a chance. As soon as the initial shock and anger wore off, Hitomi was only left with feeling a combination of excitement and anxiety. She and Momo took the written exam, with Momo acing it, while Hitomi just barely skated by. Afterwards, they were put on a bus and taken to the area where the practical was being held. Thankfully, it was just a race, so this time Hitomi crushed it, and Momo struggled. And so before she knew it, the teenager was back to training her body every day, building back up the muscles she had lost after going so long without pushing herself. It didn't help that she couldn't use her quirk for almost all of middle school, due to something Hitomi was too embarrassed to talk about. With not even a full year left to train before school started, she was truly down to the wire. Every now and then, she would question why she was going through with it, spiraling down in a panic about how nothing was going to be worth it in the end. But just as quickly, she would feel a sudden rush of that same high she reached whenever fantasizing about hero work when she was a kid. The result left her training for hours on end some days, only to have a mini crisis right after. So, there she was, walking the halls of UA, getting a feel for her soon-to-be new environment, trying to build up the courage to try and stand toe-to-toe with the world's future heroes, all while trying to tramp down the guilt of her lapse in motivation. What would Mama and Papa think of me? Hitomi cynically asked herself. Hey, Hitomi stopped, slowly looking over her shoulder at the owner of the stern voice. Before she could see any features of the person, the jacket hood she had over her head was jerked down. She squeaked, spinning around to fully face the person. Blinking up at him, she felt completely intimidated. He had long black hair and equally dark clothes, and he glared down at her from above a strange-looking white scarf, his expression nearly shadowed. Something about his tired-looking eyes was familiar, achingly so. As soon as he spotted the hue of her hair, and the fluffy orange ears sitting on top. Something in his eyes softened, but he still kept his scowl in place. "What are you doing wandering the hallways?" he demanded in a low voice. Hitomi ducked her head, staring down at her sneakers. She internally kicked herself. She couldn't believably pretend to be an examinee, as the test had already started. A test she clearly wasn't taking, as this man stared her down. Aunt Nimiri had let her in after making her promise not to snoop or cause trouble. Hitomi had no idea if this guy knew her surrogate aunt or not, and telling him Midnight herself had let her in wasn't very believable. Lost. The man gave her an unamused look. She sighed in defeat, scratching the back of her neck. "I just wanted to see this place, for real." He was silent for a moment, and Hitomi didn't dare look up. "Let's go, Sato." Her eyes widened, head snapping up to look at him. Later, once she got home, Hitomi told Ayami all about the tour some of the faculty staff gave her. The white-haired woman making a face that Hitomi couldn't decipher at the description of the man who had caught her, and she found herself feeling excited, eager. No, it was something else. She was feeling motivated. Two big and fluffy ears bounced as Hitomi all but skipped down the sidewalk. She was absent-mindedly humming a tune she couldn't remember the words to. As she turned down the last street, her feet stalled as she was met with the overbearing sight of Yue, and to her glee, she felt the sides of her mouth involuntarily curl up. She found herself jogging the rest of the way, wanting to get on school grounds as soon as possible. A warm feeling filled her chest as she ran through the gate, each step pulling her closer to the future she should have never taken for granted. Her eyes were so focused on the top of the building, as she marveled at the height the school reached, that the body in front of her wasn't even a blip on the radar. Until she bumped into it, that is, she squeaked, jerking back and looking down at the person she ran into. He was just slightly taller than her, had blonde spiky hair, and as he turned around, she saw blazing carmine-colored eyes. Then, she belatedly realized he was yelling at her. "Watch it, extra." Hitomi blinked, brain momentarily short-circuiting. "Oh yeah, when was the last time I really talked to someone who wasn't Momo, Nori, Ayami, or Hana?" she asked herself, as she couldn't seem to manage any words. Aunt Nimiri and Aunt Rumi didn't really count, as hero work kept them busy most of the time, and she hadn't been able to have an in-depth discussion with either in a while. Her lack of people skills had her handling this with the first response her mind supplied her with. "Sorry about that," she chirped, sending him a blinding smile. "When in doubt, be kind," Riku's voice whispered in her head. So when he scowled and scoffed in response, she just kept smiling, and it surprisingly wasn't that hard to keep it on once she started. The blonde gave off the same sort of energy that Nori did when he was in middle school, and something about that was comforting. The blonde turned, continuing on his way into the school. Hitomi followed behind, realizing she would have to basically walk with the guy until they parted ways for their own classes. They were almost to the door of 1A, when he snapped at her again. "The hell are you following me for?" he demanded. Hitomi paused, trying to think of a response that wouldn't anger him further. "I'm not." When his hand sparked and crackled with mini explosions, she figured any response she could have given would have set him off anyway. Maybe he's having a bad day. Her ears twitched as she thought of something. "Oh, hey, what if we're just in the same class?" At Hitomi's proposal, he scoffed. "Not a chance in hell." Choosing to not take offense to that, she merely shrugged good-naturedly, smiling at him as she walked past. "Okay." And she was honestly somewhat surprised as they both stopped to stand in front of the floor-to-ceiling door labeled 1A. So I guess I was right," Hitomi hummed. She left the blonde seething as she ran into the classroom. She was immediately able to spot Momo, who was seated on the far left row in the very back. The Ravenet waved sheepishly, as Hitomi waved at her like she was trying to flag her down in an airport. Normally, the Pinkette would have sat down right next to her only friend, but there was a specific seat Hitomi felt she needed to sit in. She walked over to it, smiling softly. While she knew it wasn't really the same exact one, the spot was more important in her opinion, right by the towering windows in the very front of the class, UA's own personal forest clear in view. She already couldn't wait to see what it would look like when the leaves began to change. Without waiting any longer, for fear of someone else taking the seat, she sat down, claiming the desk that was 4 seats in front of Momo. It was the same seat Naomi sat in during her first year. Not to mention, the seat directly behind her was the one Riku had sat. "Who knows, maybe my future life partner will sit down behind me," Hitomi thought to herself whimsically. Then the explode white blonde plopped down right behind her. Never mind. It didn't take long at all for the blonde to start a fight with someone. "Remove your foot from that desk. Such an action is insulting to those who came to UA before us, as well as the craftsman who made the desk. Like I care. What middle school are you from, you extra?" The blonde hostilely replied. Hitomi sighed, watching the back-and-forth argument between the blonde and a vaguely familiar tall guy with glasses. It was really starting to hurt her sensitive ears. "I'm from Sumi Private Academy. My name is Tenya Ida." "Oh, that's why I know him." The blonde scoffed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, a stuck-up elitist then. I should blow you to bits. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 blinked owlishly at that, feeling like it was a little extreme. The tall guy, 𝗧𝗲, seemed thrown as well. You're awful. Do you really wish to become a hero? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 winced at the volume, deciding she was done putting up with the yelling. Excuse me. 𝗧𝗲 spun around, doing some weird, stiff hand gesture. Yes, her ears flattened against her head. I really don't think yelling will solve anything. Plus, it's making my ears hurt. 𝗧𝗲 paused, glancing up at her large canine ears, before seeming to realize she probably had heightened hearing because of them. He didn't seem to take it well. I hadn't noticed. I sincerely apologize for any discomfort I've caused, he said, finishing it off with a deep bow. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 flushed violently at his over-the-top reaction, having not expected anything more than an "oh, sorry," and "no, it's fine." Really? She tried waving him off, severely regretting her decision to say anything. But someone at the door seemed to have caught his attention, and the bespectacled teen ran over to the newest arrival, after offering her a quick "excuse me." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 sat back, ears relaxing from their flattened position. Well, he was kinda intense, huh? She mused, looking over to the blonde as she sat sideways in her chair. A chill went down her spine when she looked at him. He didn't seem to have heard what she said, as he was too busy glaring daggers at the poor nervous-looking kid who had just walked in. If looks could kill. Wait, what if someone had a quirk like that? She shook herself out of her thoughts, taking a cursory look around the class, counting heads. 17, 18, 19. Her eyes widened, jaw going slightly slack. Snow White, laying right beside Maroon, accompanied by gray and icy blue irises. For a split second she doubted it, but that same dull look in his eyes gave away which Todoroki she was looking at. The pinkish scar covering his left eye was cause for great concern to well up inside the pinkette. I wonder if he ever ate that cupcake. I'm your homeroom teacher, 𝗬𝗲 Aizawa. Pleased to meet you. She was yanked out of her thoughts this time, as she snapped her head back to the front of the class. Even if he hadn't said his name, she would have known who it was, just by going off of his baritone voice and scent. When she saw him, she couldn't help but break out into a smile. Because of all the people to teach her how to be a hero, she would want it to be him. Hey, I know what you're thinking, Sato, and I'm not about to let you squander this opportunity. How do I know you? I'll go get some of the staff to give you a tour. Don't move. Yeah, she had a good feeling about him. Out of nowhere, he pulled out a navy blue tracksuit with the UA logo on it in red and white. Change into your gym clothes and head out to the grounds. As everyone who was seated slowly stood, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 remained in her seat, brows furrowed. But before she could raise her hand, Aizawa was already looking at her. Sato. She sat up, conscious of all the eyes on her. For some reason, the blonde's, Todoroki's, and the nervous-looking kid's stares felt the most heavy. Why, yes, sir. He held up the tracksuit. This one's yours. It's been modified with your quirk in mind. Don't lose it. Got it. As she took the tracksuit from him, she tried to ignore the questioning murmurs coming from her classmates. Hi, I'm Mina Ishido. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 jumped, looking over at the girl who reminded her of, oddly enough, a wingless moth. But in her opinion, the girl's mutation was amazing to look at. And of course, her lack of social skills decided to rear its head again that very moment. Wow, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 breathed. You're beautiful. Every girl in the locker room paused, turning to stare at the two pinkettes. Ishido's pink complexion turned a shade darker. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 wished the floor would swallow her up. I mean, well, it's just your mutation. It looks really cool. Ishido seemed to recover from her shock as she grinned at the Akita girl. You're pretty blunt, aren't you? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded sheepishly. I don't mean to be. She hasn't really engaged in much small talk recently. I think she's gotten a bit rusty. Momo chimed in, pulling up her track pants. You two know each other? The brunette girl who came in with the nervous kid asked. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded, steadily this time. Yep, I've known Mo since before I got my quirk. Well, it was the same day, actually. A punk-looking girl with ears that resembled cords on a pair of headphones turned to 𝗧𝗵𝗲. That reminds me, what did the teacher mean by it's modified with your quirk in mind? Oh, well, my quirk. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 paused, hoping to find the right words without making herself sound like a beast. I've lost a lot of clothes in the process of learning to use it. Oh, mysterious, Ishido hummed. After that, all the girls exchanged names with each other before they filed out of the locker room, meeting up with the rest of the class as they all made their way outside. Today, we'll be doing a quirk apprehension test, Aizawa announced to them once they were all lined up in front of him. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 set her jaw, tense smirk stretching her cheeks. I knew it. Why else would we need our gym clothes? Uraraka raised her hand. But what about orientation? No time to waste on that stuff if you want to become heroes, Aizawa stated bluntly. UA is known for its freestyle educational system. That applies to us teachers as well. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 swallowed harshly, once again beating herself up for the years of no training. softball throwing, the standing long jump, the 50-meter dash, endurance running, grip strength, side-to-side stepping, upper body training, seated toe touch. You did all these in middle school? Yes. Your standard no quirks allowed tests. Hitomi had a feeling she knew where this was going. The no quirks allowed tests were about to have a revision if she was right. This country still insists on prohibiting quirks when calculating the averages of those records. It's not rational. The Department of Education is just procrastinating. Aizawa finished, pulling a softball out of his pocket. Bakugo, their teacher called. How far could you throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo, as Hitomi now knew his name to be, shrugged casually. Great, now try it with your quirk, Aizawa told him, tossing the softball to the blonde. As he walked up into a chalk circle lined in the dirt. Do whatever you need to, just don't leave the circle. Give it all you've got, Aizawa instructed, as Bakugo stretched his arms. Awesome, Bakugo growled, a sort of feral smirk on his face. Hitomi frowned. He looks rabid. He reared his arm back, opening his mouth, shouting, die. Hitomi cocked her head. Die. As he threw the ball, an ear-splitting boom sounded out. A huge explosion erupted from his hand, launching the softball out of eyesight. The force was even enough to kick up dust as far back as where the rest of the class stood. Aizawa pulled a device out of his pocket, looking it over approvingly. Hitomi winced, her and a few others coughing at the smoke. Her hands were clamped over her ears, and to her embarrassment, her large tail was tucked between her legs. It's important for us to know our limits. Aizawa got their attention, holding up the device. 705. 2. That's the first rational step to figuring out what kind of heroes you'll be. Whoa, this is awesome. A guy with electric yellow hair cheered. 705 meters. Seriously? Jiru mumbled. So we can use our quirks for real. Man, the hero course is great. A guy with spiky red hair said. Hitomi was one of the only ones to notice the shift in Aizawa's expression. Awesome, you say. A shiver raced down her spine. You're hoping to become heroes after 3 years here. And you think it'll be all fun and games, right? Aizawa straightened up, staring them all down with an unwavering resolve in his, are they glowing, eyes. The one with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged hopeless, and will be expelled. Your fates are in our hands. Aizawa raked his hand through his hair, moving aside his bangs so he could stare them down properly. And if Hitomi thought his eyes were glowing before, she was sure about it now. Welcome, this is the hero course of UA High. Biting her lip, Hitomi looked back up at the ginormous school behind them. The school her parents went to. The school she would be damned before leaving. I'm not giving this up. Not again. Atta girl. Hitomi grinned. First up was the 50-meter dash, something that her quirk would definitely come in handy for. To her surprise, she was up against the nervous kid during her turn, who now looked even shakier than before. As she stretched, she gave him a disarming smile. Good luck. The kid jumped, and Hitomi started wondering why she was referring to him as a kid in her head. For all she knew, he could be older than her. Maybe it's his scent. He smells super innocent. And yes, Hitomi was aware of how creepy that thought sounded. Why you too? The nervous guy stuttered back. As Aizawa got ready to start the timer, Hitomi leaned down, touching the dirt with her fingertips. She grinned as the familiar tingling took over her body. I missed this. She was absently aware of all the surprised noises coming from her classmates behind her. But she was most conscious of the surprised and almost odd-sounding gasp coming from the guy beside her. At this point, she was now a towering 7.5 feet tall while in 𝐻𝐸𝐽 form. She shifted around slightly, not liking the restricting feeling coming from the gym clothes. But like Aizawa said, they did stretch to accommodate her size. Ready, go, Aizawa said as their only warning, clicking the timer. Without wasting any time, she launched herself forward, tongue hanging out as she barreled on as fast as she could. 3, 4 seconds. The robot at the end of the track chimed. Hitomi's tail wagged as she grinned, which looked more like she was just panting while she was in her 𝐻𝐸𝐽 form. 7, 2 seconds. The robot announced as the nervous guy finished. It was a good time, but clearly run normally. Hitomi shrank back down, wanting to save as much energy as possible. Quirk's not suited for this type of thing, huh? Hitomi guessed as soon as she could talk again. He jumped again, as if he hadn't expected her to talk to him. What? Oh, well, no, not exactly. Hitomi hummed, an easygoing smile still on her face. She was honestly kind of happy to meet someone who seemed more socially awkward than her. As mean as that may be, she reached out her hand, deciding to ignore the tiny flinch it caused. I'm Hitomi Sato. It's nice to meet you. He blinked as he seemed to need to process her introduction, before hastily taking her hand, face flushing a deep red. I am Izuku Midoriya. Likewise. Hitomi smiled, glad to stop calling him nervous guy in her head. Your quirk is amazing, by the way. I've never seen a transformation one quite like it. Usually the size is comparable to the real-life animal the quirk takes after. But you are giant. It was Hitomi's turn to blush, and she realized Midoriya stopped stuttering as soon as he started talking about quirks. She sheepishly tousled the hair behind her ears. I get it from my mom for the most part, but she could only ever change certain parts of her body. And there's also Ryukyu, so it's not that unique. Midoriya's eyes widened as something seemed to click in his brain. Your mom, Sato, or you. Next up, Zero and Shoji. At Aizawa's call, the two hastily moved out of the way. Hitomi missed the way Midoriya watched her calculatingly. After everyone went up, the next test started, that being grip strength. So far I haven't been able to do much, Momo murmured as she clenched her dynamometer. Hitomi gave her friend a reassuring smile, though it was wobbly due to her exertion as she gripped her own dynamometer as tight as she could. This is only the second one, and there's a ton of these. You'll be fine, Mo. The Ravenet hummed as her score came up on the tiny screen. 26 kilograms. Momo frowned, brows furrowing. I thought it would be higher. Hitomi's score came up right after, and she immediately tried to hide the score from Momo. But Asui poked her head around, glancing at the Pinkhead score. Wow, Sato, you got 53. Ribbit. Hitomi winced as Momo gave her a half-amused, half-exasperated look. You don't have to hide your score from me, she chastised. I know how strong you are. I know, I just feel guilty, I guess. Hitomi had long ago learned that her quirk came with, well, unpaid DLC she would classify it as. Due to her mass while transformed, her muscle and bone density leveled up, in a sense. As a result, Hitomi had never broken a single bone, thanks to their inhuman strength, and her muscles were naturally heftier. If she was being honest, she kind of hated it, as it felt sort of like cheating to be so strong after not training for as long as she did. Momo stared in contemplation at her dynamometer, an idea sparking. This was all about using their quirks to their fullest, testing the boundaries in which they could go. So, with that in mind, she produced a large monkey wrench out from under her shirt. Hitomi, could you hold this up for me? She asked, handing the small device over, situating the metal tool around the handle while Hitomi held it aloft. The Pinkhead's eyes sparkled. Mo, you are the smartest and prettiest girl in the whole world, she said in a deadpan, but was completely sincere. Momo smiled, used to the casual overinflated compliments. She tightened the wrench until the device threatened to break. After a couple of seconds, it beeped. 193 kilograms perfect. The third test was the standing long jump. You can totally use your quirk for this too. Hitomi cheered excitedly to Momo. Like, you could make a pull and vault over, or... She trailed off lamely, quickly running out of ideas. The taller girl nodded, smiling eagerly, yet still managing to look poised. Once again, like with the 50-meter dash, Bakugo used his explosive palms to shoot clear over the course. Same with another blonde in the class, who used his technique of shooting his naval laser. Hitomi frowned dimly when she saw Midoriya only make it about 5 feet, before landing harshly on his rear. At the pace things were going, and if he continued to get these types of scores, Hitomi was concerned that he was going to be the one who got expelled. I wonder what his quirk is, Hitomi mused. Momo hummed, brushing the dirt off of her pants, having just gone and gotten an impressive score herself. It could be anything, really. Technokinesis, invisibility, mind reading. Hitomi squeaked, flushing at the thought that he might have heard her thinking about how he smelled innocent. No wonder he was so awkward. It's because I made it awkward, she thought to herself hysterically. We don't know anything for sure. I doubt he can actually hear what you've been thinking. Calm down, Momo reassured her, seemingly able to decipher why she was panicking. The fourth test, sidestepping, was in the same vein as the previous ones, in that pretty much everyone but Midoriya nailed it. With every test coming and going, the green-haired teen got visibly more and more anxious, to the point where Hitomi could easily smell the nerves on him, putting her on edge too. All too quickly, the next test was upon them. Throwing. One by one, everyone took a softball and threw it with all of their strength. When Uraraka went up, she tossed the ball at a normal speed, instead of trying to chuck it as far away as possible. Her quirk, anti-gravity, took care of most of it as the ball flew up into orbit. Everyone, minus Bakugo and a few stoic classmates, gaped as Aizawa showed off Uraraka's score. Infinity. While the infinity symbol actually popped up. Dang, Hitomi breathed, feeling intimidated by the brunette girl now. Next up was Midoriya. With his scores, it doesn't matter how he does, he's still way behind. Hitomi murmured. Well, it's not like he'll actually get expelled, Momo pointed out. Hitomi nodded. Yeah, you're rig. Eyes widening, Hitomi rounded on Momo. What do you mean he won't? She whispered harshly. Before Momo had the chance to reply, a dull thud hitting dirt brought the two girls' attention back to Midoriya, whose ball was only a measly distance away, still clearly in sight. His eyes were blown wide in horror as he stared at the ball, slack-jawed. He shakily looked down at his hands, brows scrunched in shocked confusion. I erased your quirk. Everyone, including Midoriya, looked over at Aizawa, whose hair and scarf were floating around his head. His tired eyes were sharp and narrowed at Midoriya, his irises now glowing red. That ridiculous entrance exam, he growled, glare firmly placed on the green-haired teen. Completely irrational when you consider someone like you got in. Hitomi winced at the venom in their teacher's words, and she wondered what Midoriya could have possibly done to anger the raven-haired man so deeply. Green eyes flickered over Aizawa at a breakneck speed, until a dawning look of realization spread over Midoriya's face. Wait, I know you. You're the Erasure hero, the racer head. Lips parting, Hitomi could have sworn she had heard that name somewhere before, but couldn't place anything concrete. I saw it. How you can't control your quirk. You'd just be incapacitated again. Hitomi's keen ears picked up Aizawa's voice as he chewed Midoriya out, seeming to be the only one who could hear from the distance the rest of the class was stationed. Were you hoping someone would step in to help afterwards? Aizawa asked, tone accusatory. And no, it's not like that, Midoriya stuttered, as Aizawa wrapped him up menacingly in his strange scarf. Whatever you were planning, it would have inconvenienced those around you. He tightened the scarf. Way back when, a certain hot-blooded hero saved over 1,000 people during a disaster. He made himself a legend. Wringing her tracksuit top in her hands, Hitomi's rounded brows furrowed. Is he going to compare Midoriya to? You've got the same reckless streak, but you're totally useless after saving just a single person. Izuku Midoriya, you cannot become a hero with that quirk of yours. Biting her lip, the Pinkette refrained from moving toward the two, knowing that intervening wouldn't help anyone in the end. The only thing that would was if Midoriya could prove himself, right here and now. After glaring down at Midoriya a little longer, just for good measure, Aizawa blinked and released the green-haired teen from his scarf. You've got your quirk back. Give it another go. Let's get this over with. As their teacher stepped away from him, Midoriya started muttering to himself. Too fast and quiet for Hitomi to hear. Seems like he received some special instruction. Ed amused, hand to his chin. I wouldn't call it that. Hitomi frowned. Yeah, the instruction to leave this school. Bakugo added snidely. Hitomi locked her hands behind her back, rocking on her heels in what appeared to be a carefree manner, though the action was more of a way to calm herself down. I wouldn't rule him out just yet. The explosive blonde scowled at her, brows twitching in irritation. This time, when Midoriya stretched his arm back in preparation to throw, he looked much more confident, as if he had finally figured out the answer to some tough question. It happened in a blink, as Midoriya threw his arm forward. At first it looked the same as the first throw, but right as the ball left his hand, there was a similar boom to that of Bakugo's toss, this one less of an explosion, and more of a brutal impact. Shielding her face from the shock wave, Hitomi peeked through her arms and gaped as Aizawa already held up his score. 705. 3 just a hair farther than Bakugo's throw. Midoriya's right index finger looked broken, but he still curled his hand into a fist and smiled triumphantly at their teacher. I can still move. He panted through his wobbly grin, tears in his eyes from the undoubtedly awful pain. Hitomi would have been relieved that it wasn't telepathy, if she wasn't so busy being floored by what a powerful quirk Midoriya possessed. Woo, now that's a hero-like record if I ever saw one. Uraraka cheered, arms waving in the air as she shouted out her excitement. His finger appears to be swollen. Ed amused, thinking back on the entrance exam. What a strange quirk. Hitomi cocked her head. What happened at the entrance exam? Right after she spoke, her hair blew up into her face as Bakugo let off an explosion behind her, launching himself furiously at Midoriya. Deku, you bastard. Tell me how you did that or you're dead. Hitomi, spitting out what hair got into her mouth, jumped in concern for her freckled classmate, but Aizawa thankfully intervened, whipping his scarf at the blonde, and halting him in his tracks as it wrapped around him like it had to Midoriya. While the teacher chewed Bakugo out, Hitomi watched him and frowned heavily. Who just calls someone Deku? After that, the only other eventful thing that happened was Aizawa making it seem like Midoriya was going to be expelled for having the lowest score. Then he ended up telling them that it was all just a ruse anyway, so there was nothing to worry about. Hitomi let out a sigh, happy no one would go home in tears. Plus, she had a good feeling about Midoriya. There was just an aura around the nervous teen that reminded the Pinkette of something warm and good, but she couldn't place a finger on exactly what that something was. Once home, Hitomi groaned tiredly and flopped down onto the couch, burying her face into a cushion. Her backpack full of books was digging painfully into the small of her back, but she was too tired to move. The only thing that would make that girl get up was a tiny hand slapping her face. Hitomi wrinkled her nose, but forced herself up. Looking down to her right, she was met with 2 wide copper eyes. Hito, okay. A tired smile showed 2 sharp canines, as Hitomi sat up all the way, lifting the newly minted 3-year-old and setting her on her lap. Hito's okay, I promise. Just sleepy. Maybe Hito wouldn't be so tired if she didn't jump the shark and go to hero school. Nori said snidely as he walked by behind the couch, flicking Hitomi in the ear as he passed. Hitomi yipped, rubbing her stinging ear as she glared after Nori. And maybe Nori would have a girlfriend if he wasn't such a jerk. "Ha, nice one," he replied sarcastically, not even deigning to glance her way. Hitomi stuck her tongue out at his back, an action Hana clumsily copied. Looking back down, Hitomi started playing with Hana's fluffy rabbit feet. "Where's Mommy Bunny?" Mommy Bunny was a name Nori had once jokingly called Ayami. That winded up sticking. It was a bit funny that after years of likening Ayami to that of a skittish rabbit, the woman ended up having a daughter with a rabbit-oriented quirk. But Hitomi supposed that it must be a family trait, Ayami's daughter possessing almost the exact same quirk as her sister. Hana pointed off to her left. "Kitchen," Hitomi hummed questioningly. "You sure?" Hana nodded and continued to point. The kitchen was to the right. Hitomi shrugged and picked her up. Walking to the kitchen, she had plenty to tell her guardian about her first day, especially about how Momo had beaten the entire class, her quirk outmatching them all in versatility. Her friend really was the coolest. On their second day, Hitomi actually woke up on schedule, able to make the trip to UA together with Momo this time. The taller girl walked with poise and silent elegance, while the pinkette beside her was anything but. "Pretty crazy that we got in the same class as Todoroki, huh Mo?" Momo hummed faintly, obviously lost in her train of thought. Hitomi skipped ahead, backpack bouncing against her. Spinning around, she walked backwards to face Momo. "You're spacey, what's on your mind?" Momo blinked, and her face fell in worry. "I'm just a little worried, that's all." "About what?" Momo frowned. "The class seems to have a few interesting individuals, don't you think?" Hitomi crossed her arms behind her head, looking up at the clouds. "I'd like to think we're interesting." Momo shook her head. "No, I mean." While Momo talked, Hitomi got distracted by an oncoming figure, one who seemed to be in quite a rush. As it got closer, she could recognize the bushel of messy green locks. Right arm sweeping in the air as she still walked backwards, Hitomi beamed at him. "Hey, Midoriya. What's the rush?" In his shock at being addressed, Midoriya tripped over himself, scrambling to avoid hitting the ground. The bulky duffel bag in his grip didn't help matters at all. Taking quick long strides ahead, Hitomi put both hands on his shoulders to steady him. At the sudden contact and proximity, his face erupted into a shade of ruby red. Hitomi, oblivious of how her face was barely an inch from his, cocked her head questioningly. "You okay?" Stepping back, he nodded frantically. "Why yes, thank you." Hitomi shrugged. "I was the one who made you trip in the first place." Momo sighed at the delay, knowing Hitomi was always one to make unnecessary conversation. "What's with the bag?" Oh, it's my hero costume, actually," Midoriya stammered, but sounded proud. He jumped minutely, remembering something. Sato, I wanted to ask you yesterday, are you related to the heroes 𝐒𝐵? Shouldn't your costume be on campus?" Momo quickly cut him off, not wanting him to go into that line of questioning already. Midoriya quickly explained why he was in possession of his costume, which turned out to be that his mother made it for him. He looked rather proud of it, smiling warmly down at the bag. A shameful jealousy burned its way up Hitomi's throat, but she worked to stomp it down with a tight grin. Midoriya seemed nice, and didn't deserve any wrongful ill will she was feeling towards him, all for the fact that he still had his mom. She would have felt crushing guilt if she had known his father hadn't been around for so long, that Midoriya would have forgotten what he looked like if it weren't for photos. If she thought she was on his bad side before, then Hitomi for sure was now. The death glare Bakugo sent her and Midoriya as they and Momo stepped through the door was burning brighter than the sun. But that might have been his palms exploding sporadically that gave that illusion. While the green-haired teen quaked under the glare, Hitomi only smiled at him, skipping to her seat and dropping down on it fearlessly. It wasn't that she thought the blonde was harmless, but rather that she felt there was no way someone would throw away a spot in UA just to throw a few petty punches. Momo, on the other hand, didn't hold the same fearlessness as Hitomi. Watching the pinkette practically flaunt her courage to Bakugo as she herself was sitting at the edge of her seat, worried that she was going to end up having to break up a fight. She hasn't changed much. Momo blinked, looking to her right, where a certain boy from their past sat, while she had almost no memory of ever talking to Todoroki personally. Hitomi had filled her in the previous evening about her encounter with him when they were all kids, specifically the night that Naomi had slapped Todoroki's father right across the face. It made sense why he would ask that, seeing as how his experience with the bubbly girl was chipper on her end and frosty on his. But she never wavered at the cold reception. Watching her casually ask how Bakugo's day was so far, get venomous curses back, and continue to smile and appear unfazed, was something that resembled Todoroki's introduction to her. Minus, of course, the foul language and hateful glares. But Momo was the only one who could see clearly the true feelings beneath her smiles. While everyone else saw an admittedly ditzy girl, Momo saw the calculated and strong person Hitomi had become, all to be where she was sitting right now. No, she has. Hitomi glanced back, grinning excitedly to the Ravenet, while her eyes shined with a look of determination. She was ready for the trials ahead, so long as her closest friend was there with her. Through every class the room buzzed with muted excitement as everyone couldn't wait until after lunch, because that was when it's me. Through the door like a normal person, with a gust of wind, All Might bursted into the room, an ever-present smile on his face. Hitomi, along with the rest of the classroom, targeted their attention right on the hero, dropping any previous conversations with each other. It was the Pinkett's first time ever seeing the man in person, surprisingly, so it came to a bit of a shock to her that he smelled faintly like a hospital. For this class we'll be building up your hero foundation through various trials. All Might excitedly bellowed, reaching into a pocket behind his cape. Let's jump right in with this. He thrusted his hand forward, brandishing a card with battle boldly inscribed. The Trail of Battle. Behind her, Hitomi could hear Midoriya and Bakugo's vastly different reactions to the announcement, the former's being of trepidation, while the latter grinned eagerly, both repeating the words just spoken by the hero. And to go with your first battle. The wall to their right hissed, as several shelves slid out, holding numbered briefcases. We have the gear we had you send in requests for to match your quirk. Hitomi stiffened, leaning back in her seat while the rest of her class rushed to grab their costume. But there was a major flaw with this, that being the fact that she had received the news that her costume had been rejected late, leaving not enough time for her to send in a new request. With a quirk like hers, it was difficult making a suit that would look cool and be practical. Because of this, Hitomi's original concept had been shut down due to the effect of her power. That meant that whatever was in that briefcase was not what she had planned to be her costume, but simply a placeholder one until she could send them a new, functional design. By the time she stood and went to take her case, it was the last one there. Trudging after the rest of the aspiring heroes, Hitomi worriedly looked down, eyeing the 16 marking her case, hoping that whatever was waiting for her inside wouldn't be too different from what she had planned for. You're kidding, she whispered. With a red face, Hitomi looked herself over in the mirror, frowning deeper and deeper at her appearance. All that had been in the case was a plum-colored top and bottom and a set of arm and leg warmers. No shoes or extra gear to lose when shifting into her Akita form. The costume was made out of a stretchy fabric that was meant to grow with her when she used her quirk, similar to Mount Lady's suit. The bottoms were just a simple pair of skin-tight shorts, not even reaching mid-thigh. Her problem with the costume wasn't those, but rather with the top. Starting right under her breasts, the tight and rubbery material clung to her in a way that left little to the imagination. It was sleeveless, with the neckline reaching halfway up and clinging uncomfortably to her flushed neck. But the worst part of it all was a design choice she had no part in making. What even is the purpose of this? She desperately squeaked to her best friend beside her, looking down at her chest. In the middle of the top was a diamond-shaped window, showing off a fair bit of cleavage. Momo grimaced slightly, securing her bright yellow belt. The taller girl's costume was even more revealing than Hitomi's, but that was because she herself designed it that way. Guess a perv got a hold of it. Sorry, Sato, Ashido said apologetically. Hitomi shuddered at the idea, suddenly wishing to wash the accursed suit. Uraraka patted her shoulder, smiling sympathetically. My costume's a bit tighter than I expected too. Maybe you'll grow to like it though, who knows? Hitomi smiled tightly, rubbing her hands up and down her arms, then settled them to cover her bare stomach. She highly doubted she would have the self-confidence to keep the costume long. Walking down the concrete corridor, flanked by her female classmates on both sides, Hitomi took a deep breath to ready herself as they stepped out into the light. Let's see what you're made of, you embryos. It's time for the Trail of Battle. All Might crowed excitedly, seeming to be looking forward to this as much as they were. Hitomi jumped slightly when All Might appeared to look right at her, before coughing something awkwardly in his hand. Her brows furrowed, and she glanced behind her. What she saw was someone in a teal jumpsuit, with bunny ears. Taking a good sniff, Hitomi was able to deduce that it was Midoriya in the costume. Sir, regarding the performance ground we'll be using, is it the mock city from the entrance exam? Ada's voice echoed out of a white and cobalt blue-colored suit of armor, his arm doing the same stiff gesture it did when he was arguing with Bakugo. You'll see. In fact, take 2 steps and you'll already be there. This will be an indoor battle trail. Hitomi perked up, eyes alight with anticipation. Villain cleanup is usually seen out in the open, but statistically the better portion of it is an inside job. Most acts of villainy are committed indoors. Tail starting to wag, Hitomi grinned as All Might explained. Hostage situations were one of her parents' most handled jobs. For this test, you'll separate into hero and villain groups for a 2-on-2 team battle. How do we determine who wins and who loses? Momo asked, always the practical one. How much can we hurt the other opponents? Of course Bakugo was the one who asked that. Is there a threat of expulsion like Mr. Aizawa's exercise? Uraraka fearfully questioned. Ada's hand shot into the air. If we're separating into different groups, what would be the best way to do so? What's the scenario? 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 shyly threw her own question in. I can't hear you if you all speak at once. All Might shouted over them. For this training, we'll have some villains guard a nuclear weapon they intend on deploying. The heroes must stop them and their nefarious scheme before it's too late. If the heroes capture the villains or reach the nuclear core before the time runs out, they win. If the villains manage to keep the core the whole time, or capture the heroes, they win. All Might explained as he very obviously read from a cheat sheet, pulling out a box from God knows where. All Might brandished it, saying your teammates and opponents will be chosen by lottery. Is that really how we'll do it? Ida floundered. Hitomi stood straighter, just as Midoriya did next to her. It makes sense. Sometimes they have to. Pros are often forced to make impromptu team-ups with heroes they might not know very well. This is probably testing that. Hitomi blinked in shock, looking at Midoriya as he too seemed stunned. Slowly, even through his mask, Hitomi could see red start to shine through. A wide smile split across her face, barring her canines in an unintentionally intimidating way. While Midoriya, I've only ever done that with Momo. She placed her hands on her hips. You really know a lot about heroes, huh? Aye. Anyway, let's start this. All Might shouted, either trying to move things along so Aizawa wouldn't get cranky about him going over his allotted time slot with the student, or he simply hoped to get the attention off of Midoriya, who looked like he was going into cardiac arrest. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 hid her disappointment when Momo got paired with a fairly short guy, who looked mighty happy to be teamed up with her. When it was her turn, Hitomi reached into the yellow lot box, pulling out a ball with eye brandished on the front. Guess we're teammates, the blonde who had also gotten the eyeball said, scratching his neck nervously. His costume looked like a typical karate uniform, and behind his back, Hitomi could see a large tail, almost bigger than his torso. Her own tail wagged. Yep, I'm Hitomi-sai, I know, the blonde said, and immediately started floundering for the right words when Hitomi's ears drooped. I mean, I already heard you introduce yourself to someone else yesterday. Your voice kinda carries. Oh, Hitomi mumbled. To avoid an awkward silence, the blonde cleared his throat and held out his hand. My name's 𝗲𝗏𝗄. Hitomi smiled, happily shaking his hand. Once the teams were set, All Might reached into two more boxes, one with heroes scrawled across, and the other with villain. Team A will be the heroes, and Team D will be the villains, All Might announced, holding up the two balls. Hitomi looked to her right, over to Midoriya and Bakugo. Fate did not seem to be on good terms with the green-haired teen, as he practically trembled at the fact he would be going up against the angry blonde. Everyone else head toward the monitor room. Yes, sir. 5 large monitors greeted them as the class, minus the 2 teams, walked into the observation room, each screen showing off a different room or angle in the prop building. Now, let's start the indoor combat training with Team A and Team D. All Might turned away from the monitors, securing a small listening device in his ear so he could keep track of what the teams were saying to one another. Pay attention, you should think about what you would do. Next to her, Hitomi saw Momo create a small notepad and pencil. It brought a smile to the 𝗵𝘃𝗲's face, despite the stressful situation. At first it seemed rather laid back, with Uraraka and Midoriya slowly slinking through the halls in search of the bomb. But everything quickly changed gear when Bakugo jumped out from around a corner, blasting the hero team ruthlessly, even managing to blow off the left half of Midoriya's mask as the green-haired teen tackled and shielded his teammate. He almost got the jump on him, Ashido said, unclear if it was in praise or disapproval. What kind of man pulls cheap crap like that? Kirishima said in outrage. A surprise attack isn't manly at all. But isn't it like a villain? Hitomi pointed out, eyes locked on the monitors. They aren't fussed with what is considered cheating or unfair, right? She quickly looked to All Might, worried she was incorrect in his eyes. All Might nodded in agreement. That's right. He's playing the part. It didn't work. Midoriya dodged him. Ashido cheered. Look, there he goes. Kaminari pointed up to where Bakugo could be seen, charging at Midoriya. To the surprise of the room, when Bakugo reached him, Midoriya reached under his left arm, grabbing onto him, and using the blonde's own momentum to throw him over his shoulder, slamming him into the ground. Bakugo clearly hadn't expected that of Midoriya, as did the rest of the class. Even All Might made a sound of shock when it happened. Hey, who is Bakugo talking to? I'm not hearing anything. Can we get any sound with this video? Kirishima asked. All Might gestured to his ear. He's got a radio in his ear so he can talk to his partner. I gave it to him before the match started, along with a map of the building. He reached into a pocket that Hitomi didn't realize he had in his costume. Also this, a roll of captured tape. Wrapping this around your opponent means you've apprehended them, and they're out for the rest of the game. Ashido pointed up at the large clock by the other monitors. So there's a 15-minute time limit, and the good guys have no idea what floor the nuclear weapon is hidden on, right? Correct. Then the heroes are clearly at a disadvantage here. A big one. Real heroes have to outwit villains on a daily basis. That's life. Even when the odds aren't in our favor, we fight. The class seemed appeased by that, smiling and cheering at what their famous teacher had to say. All Might threw a fist in the air. All together, let's hear A plus ultra. Monsieur, he's on the move, the blonde in the sparkling cape said, bringing everyone's attention back to the monitors. Just in time to see Midoriya dodge another attack. Little guy's really good. He's holding his own and he hasn't even used his quirk yet. I think, Hitomi mumbled, then spoke louder. It's partially because the other guy, Bakugo, is, well, reckless, ribbit, careless. I was gonna say. Hitomi winced as Bakugo blew apart a wall. Feral. Through the smoke, Midoriya ran away, vanishing in the maze of hallways as Bakugo gave chase. He retreated. Smart. Momo crossed her arms thoughtfully. They could see Bakugo's mouth moving, as he undoubtedly was snarling something vicious at Midoriya. That guy has some real anger issues. Kinda scary. Kaminari chuckled awkwardly. At the rate he's going, there won't be a building left to train in for the rest of us. Jiru sighed, faintly annoyed. At the 6-minute mark, Bakugo finally found Midoriya, right after Ida spotted Uraraka in the weapon room. He pulled some piece of his right gauntlet, revealing a pin similar to that of a grenade's. All Might, hearing what it was the blonde was planning to do, picked up the mic. Young Bakugo, don't do it, you'll kill him. What? Half the class shouted in alarm, while the other half watched in silent shock. Bakugo pulled the pin, a raging fireball shooting out from his gauntlet, aimed straight for Midoriya, who it seemed to hit right before blowing a hole in the wall behind the green-haired teen. This is nuts, Kirishima gawped. Come in, Midoriya. Come in, young Midoriya. All Might shouted worriedly into the mic, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. That was insane. Is he okay? The boy with tape dispensers in his elbows gaped. Sir, isn't this getting out of hand? Kirishima questioned. That Bakugo is getting real crazy. He's gonna kill him. Hitomi's ears went back as several pairs of eyes turned on her. I don't think he will. What? Did you see what he just did? Kaminari gestured wildly to the monitors. Yes, Hitomi nodded, looking up and watching the blonde march intimidatingly over to Midoriya. But this is UA. And who would possibly get themselves expelled so soon? It's only our second day. And while he definitely seems, well, feral, I don't think he's intending to actually kill Midoriya. Everyone looked back over to All Might, who remained silent for a beat. Finally, he picked back up the microphone. Bakugo, use that stored up power again and I'll stop this fight. Your team will lose. To employ such a strong attack indoors is inviting the destruction of the stronghold you should be protecting. That's a poor strategy, whether you're a hero or a villain. The penalty will be a massive loss of points. Bakugo clearly hated the rule, but still lowered his arm. Instead, he charged at Midoriya, going for hand-to-hand. At first, it seemed like Midoriya would turn this attack back around on him, like the previous ones. But Bakugo switched gears, launching himself over Midoriya with a well-aimed blast, turning in the air and shooting Midoriya in the back. Whoa, what was that move? He doesn't come off as a guy with a strategy, but he's actually quite intelligent, Todoroki remarked from the back of the class. Speaking up for the first time, Hitomi stared at him in wonder, surprised to hear how soft and nearly velvety his voice sounded. What are you talking about? Kirishima asked. He changed his trajectory while in midair using a blast that doubled as a smokescreen. Very clever. A feint attack like that requires an extreme amount of precision. He had to calculate the physics and demonstrate control over his quirk. Momo explained, easily wording it in a way to show off her own intelligence, while also keeping it simple enough to understand. Ugh, Bakugo is uber talented. I hate it, Kaminari complained, sticking his tongue out. In a flurry of attacks, Bakugo gave Midoriya barely any time to breathe, let alone fight back, finishing it off by throwing him into the ground like what had been done to him shortly before. This is too hard to watch. All he has to do is wrap tape around him, not kill him. Ashido covered her eyes. Bakugo certainly is acting like a villain. Tokoyami, as Hitomi remembered his name to be, shook his head in shame at his classmate. I thought Midoriya was pretty amazing at the start of the fight, but he's completely outmatched in terms of combat power. Not to mention, Bakugo seems like a natural at all this stuff. Kaminari lamented. You're forgetting. Hitomi looked back at everyone, arms crossed. Midoriya still hasn't used his quirk. He's running away. Not very manly, but he doesn't have a choice. He's outgunned, unless he's got some kind of plan. It's possible. Cornered, Midoriya shouted something at Bakugo, right before they ran at each other. Midoriya's right arm glowed as he powered it up, and Bakugo's gauntlet sparked with crackling explosions. They're gonna kill each other. Sir, All Might seemed pained as he raised the mic to his mouth. Both of you, stop! Midoriya yelled something, which made All Might fall silent. Instead of hitting Bakugo, Midoriya aimed upwards at the ceiling. But the crater it made in the floors above, Uraraka used the debris as projectiles to hit at Ida with a stone pillar she made weightless. And as Ida ducked for cover, she leapt over him, landing on the bomb, officially winning the match in favor of the heroes. Right as the time ran out, You did it, All Might whispered, seemingly more aimed to one specific person. The hero team wins. Kirishima blinked. That was. Feral. Kaminari nudged Hitomi, winking. The Pinkette nodded, staring at the monitor with Bakugo and Midoriya. Yeah, the face the blonde was making, shocked and almost broken, made something stir in her. A strong curiosity started forming inside her about the explosive boy, who until now had seemed so unshakably hostile. Maybe one day, she would look back on this day and mark it as the first time she considered there might be more to Katsuki Bakugo than just a feral bully. Commence the indoor combat training. Team I, Team B, your time starts now. This is gonna be great. Anjuru didn't share her sentiment, instead choosing to watch the door in muted dread. Hitomi bounced excitedly, until she realized that probably wasn't something a villain would be seen doing in the middle of a high-stakes job. So settling her expression into an evil smirk, she crossed her arms, throwing her head back and giving a maniacal laugh. Those heroes won't know what hit them. She deepened her voice, baring her canines. Just wait till we get through with, shouldn't we be making a plan? Anjuru sighed, staring at her as if she was insane. We're up against Todoroki. He's one of the students and on recommendation. Hitomi dropped her arms, losing the faux mask of villainy. So, I am too. What do you think we should? Her eyes widened, ears shooting back as the fur on her tail stood on end. Abandoning the floor, Hitomi launched herself into the air, bending her legs and keeping them close to her chest as, in a flash, the room was enveloped in ice. The ceiling, the walls, and most importantly, the floor. Anjuru made a startled sound as he experimentally tried moving his legs, but was disheartened to see his bare feet stuck in the ice. Why didn't you jump out of the way? Hitomi asked, calmly clinging to the weapon as a safe ground. I didn't know it was coming. The tailed student snapped, a vein popping from his forehead. Hitomi blinked. Oh, Anjuru scowled at the crystalline ice caging in his feet. This quirk is insane. Hitomi hopped down, nearly slipping, and ran over to her teammate. She looked up to the doorway, however, when she heard ice crunching underneath someone's feet. Pry yourself up if you want, but it might be hard to fight me with no skin on the bottom of your feet. His voice was mellow and cool, but the look in his visible eye was downright predatory. Hitomi frowned, moving to stand in front of Anjuru. That doesn't look very practical, you know. A puff of air left Todoroki's mouth, made visible by the chill in the building. He seemed unbothered by the surely hindering costume, which consisted of his left side being completely covered in ice. Step aside, he ordered calmly, walking toward them. No way, Hitomi barked, crouching down with her fingertips grazing the icy floor. In a flash she was charging at her classmate, covered in orange and white fur, standing at 7.5 feet. There was an exceptionally large downside to her quirk, one that hadn't come up yet. But when Todoroki made a thin frisbee out of ice, flicking it out the window, her weakness was made known. Sato, Anjuru chastised, staring at her in disbelief. While using her quirk, her common sense was thrown out, similarly to the frisbee she was now chasing. The ice cracked beneath her paws as she dashed to the window, whining when she could only fit her head through. The hero team wins. Like a bucket of freezing water dousing her, Hitomi jerked in surprise, regaining some of her dulled mind. Shrinking back down, she whirled around, mouth hanging open in shock and anger. Todoroki stood by the bomb, hand held against it. His cool gray eye stared back at her, unfazed. The ice began melting, steam raising in the air. Huh, heat too. Anjuru gawked. That was a dirty trick. Hitomi pouted, crossing her arms. How'd you even know it would work? Todoroki only offered her a passing glance as he calmly strided to the door. A hunch. It's not your fault. We're just playing on different levels. Her ears and tail fluffed up in offense. Anjuru quickly intercepted her from going after the two-toned boy. Come on, we already lost. It's best we don't get ourselves detention on top of that. Her teammate eased her, gently patting her back. I wasn't gonna fight him or anything. Hitomi mumbled, cheeks puffed out petulantly. Sure, Anjuru sighed wearily, trudging out of the now damp and humid room. His pink-haired classmate followed close behind, still pouting over the quick defeat. After them went Zero and Kirishima versus Tokoyami and Asui. Then finally Momo went, with the small grape-head guy, against Jiru and Kaminari. Hitomi paid no mind to any strategy used in her friend's fight, simply cheering and booing whenever Momo would do something cool or was challenged. It wasn't until she came back out and asked Hitomi what she thought, that the Pinkette realized she hadn't come up with a single constructive thing to say, other than an energetic "that was awesome." That's a wrap. Super work, you really stepped up to the plate. And we didn't have any major injuries, except for Midoriya. You should be proud. Excellent first day of training, all around. All Might congratulated them all after the final match was completed. I lost so quickly, Hitomi whined, slumping dramatically against Momo. It was over before I could do anything cool. You'll get another chance soon enough. Momo gently pushed her upright. Hitomi perked up, tail swinging. Yeah, even despite being used to Hitomi and her occasionally slow attention span, Momo still couldn't help the urge to give her an unimpressed stare. Hitomi, it's only our second day. You will have more than enough time to prove yourself. Tail wagging at a fast pace, Hitomi pumped a fist with a determined grin. You're right. The Ravenet sighed through her nose, too spent to humor her friend's energy. Sometimes it felt like Hitomi was doing her best impersonation of an upbeat shoujo manga character, and it was occasionally, frankly, exhausting. Asui raised a gloved hand. It's nice to hear some encouraging words after our homeroom class. Mr. Aizawa was kind of a buzzkill. All Might took the praise well, throwing his arms up excitedly. I'm happy to bring such staggering positivity to my alma mater. That's all for now, folks. I should go and check on young Midoriya's progress. Now, watch how a pro exits, like he's got somewhere to be. Turning on his heel, he charged away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and chunks of debris in his wake. The class gaped at the display of speed. No trace of him being left behind once the dust floating in the air settled. Okay, you guys. That is a hero. Kaminari gushed. Ajaru sighed. I'll never be able to run that fast. So awesome. Hitomi smirked. Knowing another hero that was almost able to match All Might's speed, someone she had had the honor of learning under back in middle school, all due to lucky connections. Her smirk waned. Yes, Hitomi was very much aware of the privileges she had been gifted throughout her life. Even Momo didn't have quite the amount of help as she did. So any pride in her abilities she took was dimmed by the acceptance that she would never be where she was now if her parents weren't who they were. Can't wait to tell Hana all about today. Sitting at her desk in the front, Hitomi idly spun a pencil in her hand, her other fidgeting with the ends of her long hair. She was relieved to be back in her normal UA uniform, still feeling the effects of wearing such a skin-tight suit even after finally getting it off. Momo raised a brow at Hitomi's inability to sit still. Have you been remembering to take your medication recently? The pencil fell onto her desk, fumbled from her hand. She was saved by the door to class being opened, a distinctly green-haired figure stepping through. Hey, it's Midoriya, Kirishima said with a grin, running over along with a few others to welcome their classmate back. Good to see you back, super. Man, I don't know what you were saying during that match, but you were all fired up, I can't believe you held your own against Bakugo. He's super strong, 𝐬𝐸 said. You did a great job dodging. Ashido pumped her arms. You guys really turned it up in the first match, so none of us held back in our rounds either. The biggest one in their class, Sato, tacked on gladly. You were far from elegant, but I suppose, the blonde with the belly laser started to speak, but Ashido bounced in front of him, too wound up to notice. And the dodging was like whoa. Midoriya looked from each of them frantically, face flushing from the attention. He seemed like he wasn't used to being gushed over, which didn't make much sense considering how incredible his quirk was. Kirishima pointed a thumb to his face with a wide grin. Hey, I'm Ajaru Kirishima. We've been going over training results while you were in recovery. Hi, I'm Hanta 𝗬𝐸. More importantly, I'm 𝗬𝐸 Ashido. And I just gotta say, your dodging was awesome. Ashido spoke over the flashy blonde again. Asui peeked over the pink girl, having been behind but unseen due to her size. Tsuyu Asui, but please call me Tsu. Hey, Sato. Sato was brief and to the point. Midoriya waved his uninjured hand awkwardly. Hey guys, and my name's Maita. The grape head jumped up into the air in order to be seen. Where the heck did you pop out of? Kirishima stared at the small student. UA's shiniest star here. This time he was interrupted by an eager Hitomi. Hey, how you feeling? All healed up. She leaned in between Kirishima and 𝗬𝐸, smiling cluelessly as Midoriya inched back away from her uncomfortably close position. Kinda. He awkwardly tried and failed to wave his right arm, which was braced to his front in a sling. Takoyami, stop using that desk as a chair. Get off of it this instant. Ida irately ordered, arms moving stiffly to accentuate his point. Dude, you need to chill. Jiru casually commented, making Ida twitch. You're carrying a lot of tension. Ajaru calmly pointed out. Ida sagged. No one understands. I cannot condone actions that disrespect these desks. Not when brave men and women, our upperclassmen, once used them. The passion in his voice made Hitomi feel for him, and with her own sentimentality for her mother's old desk, she chose to give the blue-haired teen a hand, parting from Midoriya, much to the boy's relief. Yeah, what he said. Hitomi bounced over, pumping a fist in the air. We're soon to be heroes, not delinquents. Ado looked as if he could cry, smiling wobbly at the show of support. Exactly. Thank you, Sato. Do you ever calm down? Ajaru asked. Hitomi cocked her head. What do you mean? I am calm. The sound that came from Ajaru's throat was akin to wet choking. So, anyway, wanna grab a bite sometime? Kaminari asked Uraraka as he and she returned to the classroom carrying stacks of books. What kind of stuff do you like? Anything sweet. Hey, Deku. She noticed Midoriya standing by the door near the front of the classroom. She ran over, scanning his body with a concerned frown. Why didn't she heal all your injuries? Well, it has to do with how much stamina I'm using. Stamina? Midoriya glanced around the room, noticing the empty desk behind Hitomi's. Uraraka, where's Kacchan? Uraraka scratched the back of her head, eyes falling to the floor. We tried to stop him from leaving, but he wouldn't listen. Hitomi stood to the side, listening with one ear aimed in their direction. She had missed the aforementioned interaction, as she had been the last to struggle out of her costume. The humidity Todoroki had made when using his quirk made her skin damp and sticky, making the tight rubbery suit nearly impossible to get out. By the time she returned and plopped down at her desk, Bakugo was already gone. You just missed him, Uraraka finished. And not a moment later, Midoriya was racing back out the door. Why is he going after that hothead? Kaminari asked. Not the only one to wonder why Midoriya seemed so concerned about the guy who could have killed him just earlier. I don't know, but that guy looked seriously torn up after he lost. Maybe Midoriya feels bad, Zero suggested, crossing his arms behind his head. So not manly. Kirishima shook his head. Do you think he'll catch up to him? Isui asked, index finger raised to the corner of her mouth. Let's go spy on him and see. Ashido jumped up, running out the door much like Midoriya had. Already knowing what was about to happen, Momo tried to grab Hitomi's sleeve, but the pinkette was quicker and slipped by, chasing after Ashido while cheering in agreement. Uraraka followed out of concern for her new friend. And Isui did as well, if only to know whether or not Midoriya was able to make it in time. There they are. Ashido spotted them through one of UA's insanely huge windows, stopping to watch as Bakugo seemed to be yelling at Midoriya. Big surprise. Sato, can you listen in from here? Uraraka asked, staring as Bakugo threw his whole body into whatever he was saying. Hitomi shook her head. No, even I can't hear that well. The four girls all flinched in surprise when a gust of wind trailed behind All Might, who suddenly appeared just in time to grab Bakugo and keep him from exiting the archway at the front of the campus. Whoa, what's All Might doing? Giving a pep talk maybe. Doubt it'll work, Hitomi commented. Not with the hostile body language coming off of the blonde student. Sure enough, Bakugo shrugged him off and stomped away, leaving All Might and Midoriya to stand there. I wonder what that was all about, Ashido mused. The fated battle between rivals, Uraraka stated, like it was common knowledge. Whatever Midoriya was saying, it looked like Bakugo really wanted to punch him. Uraraka pressed her forehead against the glass, fists clenched. Childhood friends turned enemies. All Might turned to Midoriya, saying something that made the teen flail and talk animatedly with his free hand. Hitomi watched the interaction, fuchsia eyes pinned on them, unblinking. Hito home. Stepping into the living room, Hitomi threw her backpack onto the couch and raised her arms, echoing Hana's cheer. Nori sat on the floor, the toddler sitting across from him at a miniature table lined with pink plastic teacups. He offered Hitomi a grunt in greeting, scooping Hana another imaginary helping of sugar to sweeten her tea. His dreadlocks were pulled back with a pastel pink scrunchie, and his face was covered in stickers. It was obvious Hana had prettified him, not an uncommon occurrence. Guess what? Hitomi flopped down on the floor beside Hana, looking to her brother while laying on her stomach and kicking her legs. Nori rolled his eyes, knowing she wouldn't continue until he participated. What? We trained with All Might today. She sat up, tail wagging. When Hana clumsily handed her a plastic cup, she took it gracefully. It was so cool, even though I got beat pretty fast. Yeah, who whooped your ass? Nori absently asked as he pretended to take a sip of tea. Oh yeah, you'll never believe it. It was Shouto Todoroki. A wet raspberry sounded behind the lip of the cup, and the three sat in silence for a beat. Nori, did you just do an imaginary spit take? I'm a method actor, shut up. How's your mouth? Momo hesitantly broached, wincing at the dejected frown on her best friend's face. Feels weird. Her voice lisped in an odd way, and her teeth noticeably stayed stuck together in an irritated clench. Well, you know what the dentist said. They should be all aligned right by the end of our third year. Yeah, Momo sighed, slinging her messenger bag over her shoulder and picking up Hitomi's brightly colored backpack to hold out to her. Are you going to be okay? I mean, so long as the braces are in, you can't. I know, Hitomi huffed, running her tongue over the newly placed metal brackets lining her teeth. Her damn canines were too large for her mouth, pressing her teeth against each other so tightly her dentist told her it would cause some serious problems if they didn't put in braces now. Them combined with her reading glasses made her look like the resident nerd stereotype of 𝗬𝗵𝗲. The worst part about it all, however, was that while she was like this, she was completely unable to use her quirk, or risk seriously hurting her mouth. Momo gave her a commiserating pat on the back, pursing her lips in a mirthless smile. You'll be okay. You always bounce back. Hitomi stood, debating the merit of that before following the taller girl out of the house. Sometimes that felt like all she ever did. Try to bounce back. Oh, Hitomi froze, standing in the middle of the sidewalk. Well, shoot. Clustered at the front gate of UA was a horde of reporters, all clambering over each other to badger every passing student trying to get inside. Of all the days not to walk with Momo. The 𝗵𝗃 squared her shoulders with a frown, removing her backpack and shirking off her gray blazer, throwing it over her head, covering most of the brightly colored hair, and more importantly her large pointed ears. With a grounding breath, she marched onward, coming up to the mass of people blocking the way. "Excuse me, sorry," she murmured, squeezing through the gaps between bodies. She kept her head low, eyes on the ground, hoping no one would recognize her. Typically, children of less famous heroes weren't swarmed too badly, but that tended to change if said heroes were dead. Hitomi and Nori still often had to duck away whenever caught in the crosshairs of the media. Suddenly she was halted, bumping into something solid. Her nose was unexpectedly filled with the pleasant smell of burnt caramel, as it was buried in familiar gray fabric. The body she stumbled into tensed, and Hitomi spotted the crackles sparking before he even turned to her. When he did, she was wholly unsurprised to see that same sneer she received the first time she collided with him. Bakugo glared, hand raised and setting off sporadically. "You," Hitomi beamed. "Good morning." His eyes sharpened, blazing with anger she had no trouble shrugging off. Her unfazed smile must have only fueled his ire, and she noticed a stronger spike of that sugary smell. She hadn't expected Bakugo to have such a nice scent. Not naturally, at least. It really didn't fit him, the sweetness, but it was nice nonetheless. "Excuse me, kid." Hitomi flinched, ignoring the consequences and diving behind the still agitated Bakugo for cover. Before the blonde could demand the 𝗵𝗃 to back off, or yell at her in general, the female reporter who had called out to him was now in front of them. The woman had an orange band around her left bicep, the initials HNA in bold across it. She held a microphone to her mouth, and a cameraman stood resolutely by her side. "Are you in All Might's class? Oh, hold on, aren't you that sludge villain kid?" Bakugo stiffened, turning and continuing on through the gate like he had before Hitomi stopped him. "Walk away." The reporter seemed sufficiently affected by the venom in Bakugo's voice, backing off and rounding on the only other student in the crowd. Hitomi, once again acting without thinking, whirled around and grabbed the back of the retreating blonde's blazer, keeping hold of it to escape the woman and her cameraman. He stomped forward, ignoring the girl latched onto him all the way to the entrance of the building. At that point he finally stopped and turned his head to snarl at her. "Get off." But Hitomi blinked, releasing her hold and taking a step back with her hands raised in surrender. "Sorry, I just didn't want them to stop me and notice who I was." Bakugo's face remained unchanged, a scoff leaving his mouth. After a few seconds she remembered her appearance, and sheepishly removed the fabric from her head, pulling it back down and sliding her arms through. By the time she looked back up, Bakugo had already put a fair distance between them, his hunched shoulders stiff, with his hands shoved angrily in the pockets of his drooping pants. "Ah, wait up. Izuku Midoriya, Shouto Todoroki, Ochako Uraraka, Mina Ashido." Bakugo, what was his first name? Momo sighed, sitting at her desk and redoing her ponytail. "I think it was Katsuki." Hitomi nodded, legs kicking idly as she sat sideways in the seat in front of Momo's. "Right. Then there's Kyoka Jiru, Meshiro Anjiru, Aijiru Kirishima, Suiwa Sui, Hanta Siro, Sato, didn't get his first name. What are you doing?" Kaminari leaned over from where he stood talking casually with Siro. Right, Denki Kaminari. She's trying to memorize everyone's names so she doesn't ever accidentally say one wrong or forget." Momo dropped her hands, her spiked black hair back in a pristine ponytail high on her head. Hitomi nodded with a hum. "Yep, the sooner I memorize them all, the sooner we can all get better acquainted," she chirped with a sharp-toothed grin. Siro shielded his eyes as if blinded. "So bright. Oh, so you want to get better acquainted then?" Kaminari raised a sly brow. Hitomi nodded again, smile never wavering. "That's right. I hope we come to be great friends, Kaminari." The blonde paused, wrong-footed by the oblivious response he received. "Oh, yeah." The 𝗵𝗃 hopped up, sidestepping him to return to her own desk. She may not have been the most honest with him about the name thing. Aunt Nimari taught her that everyone likes hearing their own name, so if you happen to use it in conversation as often as you can without arousing suspicion, then it was a good way of garnering trust and friendship that much sooner. Bakugo pointedly ignored her return, glaring out the window to their left, chin resting on his hand. The door at the front of the classroom opened, and Aizawa stepped through, still looking tired and disheveled as he did every time they saw him. "All right, let's get this underway so I can rest," he sighed, stopping behind his desk and glancing over a few papers. To the class's great relief, he started out positive. "Decent work on yesterday's combat training, you guys. I saw the video feeds and went over each of your team's results." But it didn't last long, his eyes falling on a certain hothead first. "Bakugo, you're talented, so don't sulk like a child about your loss, okay?" Hitomi's eyes widened, and she risked a glance back at him over her shoulder. To her immense shock, he only scowled tightly, looking away. "Yeah, whatever. Well, that was unexpected." Maybe he could handle things better than they all originally assumed. Aizawa looked to the desk behind Bakugo. Midoriya, I see the only way you won the match was by messing up your arm again. Work harder, and don't give me the excuse that you don't have control over your quirk. That line's already getting old. You can't keep breaking your body while training here. But your quirk will be really useful if you can get a handle on it. So show a little urgency, huh? Midoriya, while taking the reprimands all in stride, even seemed emboldened by it, nodding once with a firm, right. And Sato. Hitomi winced, biting down on her bottom lip. She felt small under her teacher's heavy gaze, and prepared herself for a strict verbal lashing. You need to learn how to communicate. Your reaction time is impressive. But it won't do you any good if you abandon your teammates and assume they don't need your help. Not everyone can read what you're thinking, so work on how to share your ideas and concerns with others. Got it? Yes, sir. Hitomi nodded with a nervous half-smile. Aizawa seemed satisfied, turning back to the papers. Let's get down to business. Our first task will decide your future. Hitomi sat straighter. Is it another quirk test? You all need to pick a class representative. Oh good, just normal school stuff. Kirishima threw a clenched fist in the air. Pick me, guys. I want to be class rep. Kaminari raised a relaxed hand. I'll take it. Yeah, you're gonna need me. Jiru threw in. Someone with style would be best. Aoyama, Hitomi remembered his name to be, was again interrupted by Ashido. I'm, totally the right pick. Minda leapt out of his seat. My manifesto is for all the girls' skirts to end 30 centimeters above the knee. Hitomi's ear twitched, her smile going thin and tight. What? Hey, pick me, damn it. I'm your only choice. Bakugo raged behind her. Silence. Everyone, please. Everyone turned to look back at Ida, the room quieting down. Ida stood by his desk, arms moving stiffly to accentuate his point. The class representative's duty is to lead others. That's not something just anyone can do. You must first have the trust of every student in the classroom. Therefore, the most logical way to fill this position is democratically. We will hold an election to choose our leader. With sparkling eyes, Hitomi stared in awe at Ida. He managed to get everyone to calm down and listen to the very sensible points he made. All in the name of making sure the class received the best person for the job. Like a pack alpha, the Pinkette looked back over her shoulder, raising a silent brow at her best friend. Momo caught the glance, gleaning the message clearly from it. With an inaudible sigh, she nodded her reassurance. Hitomi knew who she was voting for, and Momo was fine that it wasn't her. Is this really the best idea? Kaminari asked. We've only known each other a few days. Asui put a finger to the corner of her mouth. How do we know who we can trust? Besides, everyone will just vote for themselves. Kirishima added on. Most people will. But that means whoever does receive multiple votes must truly be the most suitable person for the job. Ada turned to their teacher, who was zipping himself up in that yellow sleeping bag he came out of their first day. It's the best way, right, sir? Do what you want, just decide before my nap's over. He flopped down onto the floor. Thank you for your trust. So, how do we do this? Uraraka questioned, glancing around the room to see if anyone had any ideas. We could put our votes in, like a hat or something. Kind of like a lottery draw, but counting them up. Ashido eagerly suggested. Does anyone even have a hat in here? Zero raised a thin brow. Moo. Hitomi perked up, shooting up and turning in her seat, leaning over the back. Can you make something? Momo blinked, cheeks flushing as everyone seemed to stare at her now all at once. With a faint murmur of confirmation, she reached under the bottom of her white button-up shirt. A light glow emitted from underneath, and after a few seconds she pulled out a plain ceramic bowl. Will this do? Yes, thank you, Yagurazu. Ida took the bowl and set it down on Aizawa's desk. All right, everyone, write down your vote and place it in the bowl. Don't try to write more than one. This needs to be honest and fair. Hitomi happily scribbled down her answer, using a pink glitter gel pen to do so. If she wasn't allowed to use it for homework, she was going to use it for everything else. One by one each student stood and dropped in their ballot, monitored by Ada who stood by it, having already cast his vote. In the end each of their names was written down on the chalkboard, with their number of votes next to them. Most had a single one to their name. Some were clear that they had voted for themselves, but two at the top. Midoriya had 3, and Momo had 2. Hitomi rested her chin on her hands with a soft hum. She was unbothered that she didn't receive a vote, but was a little down that no one else seemed to have been impressed by Ida's vigor and sense of justice, as he only had the single vote she gave him. It only went to show she was right, as he prioritized the class by not simply voting for himself. How did I get 3 votes? Midoriya sputtered, the most shocked out of everyone that he had won. Bakugo slammed his hands on his desk, standing and scowling. Okay, you idiots, who voted for him? What, did you honestly think anyone was gonna vote for you? Zero said snidely, unfazed when Bakugo's blazing glare turned on him. What did you just say? You wanna go? Don't tell me you voted for that weak nerd. 1 vote. Ada stared at the chalkboard, seeming unable to decide between being upset that he lost, or being honored that someone had chosen to vote for him in the end. Midoriya and Momo walked to the front of the class, the former shaking noticeably while the latter remained poised as always. Aizawa sat up from his spot on the floor. "All right, the class rep is Midoriya, and our deputy is Yaoyorozu." Hitomi pumped a fist in the air. "Yeah, Deputy Momo. Hitomi, please." The Ravenet ducked her head to hide her warming cheeks. Midoriya still looked to be in shock. "Really? It's not a mistake. How did this happen?" Momo sighed, hands clasped primly at her front. "This might not be so bad," Asui said optimistically. "Yeah, I can get behind Midoriya, I guess." Kirishima agreed. Yaoyorozu was totally on top of it when it came to our training results. Just when the redness was leaving her face, Momo heard Kaminari and flushed again. "Way to go, Mo." Their teacher disappeared back under his desk. "Sit down, Sato." "Yes, sir." Deputai. Duh. Hitomi, please." "Sorry." Hitomi fell silent, sitting across from her friend in the cafeteria. "I'm just excited for you." "This is so cool." Momo sighed, poking around at her food. "If you thought so, why not vote for yourself?" Hitomi paused, looking down at the large bento Nori had made her, full of hearty nutrients and vitamins, perfect to fuel her quirk. She'd make sure to thank him again later. As much as he pretended otherwise, he really did hope to see her excel in UA. "Well, I wouldn't be a good pick for it, so I chose someone who I thought would be." Momo nodded. "Ida." "Yep." She took a heaping bite of rice and vegetables. "He got everyone to listen to him. Plus he smells trustworthy," she mumbled through the food. Momo had long since grown used to Hitomi casually mentioning people's scents and what they said about their character. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 had once said that Momo herself smelled like intelligence and compassion. The raven-haired girl wondered if smell even had anything to do with it, and if it was actually just Hitomi's instincts telling her people's true intentions. "So, have you spoken to anyone in the class?" She tried to sound nonchalant in her tone. Hitomi hummed questioningly and cocked her head, her mouth too full to open and ask for an elaboration, or risk spilling and making an embarrassing mess. Momo frowned, gently stabbing her lunch with her chopsticks. "Well, I was just wondering if you had gotten around to really talking with anyone, and if you had happened to mention anything." Hitomi swallowed hard, mouth suddenly dry. "You mean, mention that thing?" Momo nodded once with a sigh. "Yes, I think Midoriya might already suspect something." "I know." Momo's head shot up. "What?" Hitomi smiled, though it was rueful. "Every time we run into each other he gets this starstruck look on his face. I think my name and quirk were enough to clue him in." Momo reached a hand out. Hito. An alarm bell rang shrilly through the cafeteria, causing Hitomi to wince and cover her ears. "Warning. Level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate the building in an orderly fashion." "Mo," Hitomi squeaked, tail tucking. "Let's go." Momo stood, taking Hitomi's hand and pulling her along towards the exit. Of course, they weren't the only ones. The exit soon clogged with panicked students from every year and department, all pressed up against each other to try to squeeze through. The hall outside didn't fare any better. In fact, it was even worse. Everyone packed like sardines, tight enough no one could even make much headway. The deafening cacophony of so many raised voices drilled painfully in Hitomi's head, her hands instinctively raising to cover her ears, which was a mistake, as Momo was pushed along and lost in the sea of students, leaving Hitomi to stand curled in on herself, eyes shut tight, teeth grinding. The mass of warring smells didn't help, and turned her stomach with sudden nausea. "Hitomi." 𝗵𝘃𝗀 flinched, raising her head and looking toward her friend's call. "Mo, Hitomi yelped as a body bumped roughly into hers, knocking her back. She careened towards the floor, and tensed in preparation for the painful landing. But two strong hands caught her from behind, holding her biceps and hoisting her upright. "Whoa, you okay?" "Yay, oh, wow." Hitomi blinked, the noise and smells dulling as she stared at the person who saved her from a nasty spill. He was, wow, towering over her. The very well-built male student holding her was imposing to say the least. His arms and chest were muscled, enough that Hitomi could see them pressed against his white button-up, his blazer missing. He bore a kind smile, one that filled her chest with a warm feeling, and his sky-blue eyes looked her over to make sure she was all right. They were an interesting shape, and his shining blonde hair was perfectly coiffed atop his head. Why was it always blondes? Thank you," Hitomi stammered, cheeks flaming. The blonde smiled wider, showing off his white teeth. "No problem. Any idea what's going on here?" He looked up, peeking over the heads of the crowd. She noticed the way he kept his smile in place, despite his eyes now holding a gleam of calculation. "Did you hear the alarm?" "I did. But everyone panicking is making it an even worse problem than it already is." He gave her biceps a reassuring squeeze, and with a start she realized he had never let go. Stay here, close to the wall. I'm gonna go try to. Something flew overhead, the gust blowing 𝗃𝗏𝗄's hair in her face. There was a harsh slam, followed by a stern voice calling out for everyone's attention. She brushed the pink locks away just in time to see him stabilize himself before his voice boomed over the crowd. Listen up. Everything is okay, 𝐒𝐴 declared to the mass of students, his body held in a strange position under the exit sign over the doorway everyone had been scrambling to get through. It's just the media outside. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. We're UA students. We need to remain calm and prove that we're the best of the best. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 stared, mouth parted in surprise. Like magic, everyone fell silent and stopped, looking around at each other, checking on those who looked a little jarred from the mob. It was really quite impressive for 𝐒𝐴 to be able to get through to them so quick and concisely, just like an alpha. Do you know him? The blonde asked when seeing the proud look on 𝗃𝗏𝗄's face. Oh, yeah. She nodded, sheepishly putting some distance between them now that she could move freely. We're in the same class. His name is 𝗃𝗏𝗄. The blonde blinked, then dropped a fist in his open palm with a nod. 𝗃𝗏𝗄, yeah, I thought he looked familiar. 𝗃𝗏𝗄. The blonde and 𝗃𝗏𝗄 both looked toward the low voice, finding a black-haired boy awkwardly trying to squeeze through the crowd. Once he reached them, he looked the blonde, 𝗃𝗏𝗄, over worriedly. You okay? You disappeared. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 nodded with a smile. Yep, everything's fine. A first year handled the situation pretty well. The black-haired teen let out a small sigh of relief, but tensed when he noticed 𝗃𝗏𝗄 staring at him. He turned, aiming his face toward the wall. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 chuckled good-naturedly, patting his friend on the back, before leading him away from the cluttered hallway. He glanced back to 𝗃𝗏𝗄. Welp, see you later, firstie. Yeah, 𝗃𝗏𝗄 murmured, waving as the flush returned to her cheeks. She looked down at her shoes, shaking her head at her own silly feelings. Crushes were the last thing she needed while trying to become a hero. So, with Herculean effort, she forced it all down, not letting herself relax until she felt her face cool. 𝗃𝗏𝗄. Momo rushed to her, splitting from the crowd and looking her friend over like the dark-haired boy had done for 𝗃𝗏𝗄. Are you all right? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to let you go. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 waved her off. It was my fault. Besides, I'm totally fine. Momo sagged, releasing a breath she had been subconsciously holding in. I'm glad. Come on, we should head back to the cafeteria. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 started to nod when she remembered they had left their lunches behind, including her bento full of food made with care by Nori. Oh shoot, you're right. Let's go. Momo had no time to protest, being dragged away by the frantic Pinkette. It's time, class rep, let's begin. Okay. Midoriya practically trembled behind the podium. Standing patiently next to him was Momo. So, we need to figure out who the other class officers will be. He managed to get out without stuttering. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 was looking down at her desk, tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth as she tried making a tower of balanced erasers and pencils. However, it toppled when she peered back up to the front of the class, her ears pinned straight ahead at what Midoriya said next. But first, there's something that I want to say. I've thought a lot about this. He closed his eyes and shouted his next sentence. And I think that 𝗃𝗏𝗄 should be our class rep. The class all looked to Midoriya in shock and confusion, though no more so than 𝗃𝗏𝗄 himself. Midoriya relaxed slightly, standing taller and speaking softer. He was able to capture everyone's attention and get us in line. So I believe that he should be the one leading our class from now on. 𝗃𝗏𝗄's lips slowly turned up into a tooth-bearing smile. Yeah, you know what? If Midoriya vouches for him, I'm good. Plus he was a big help. He totally manned up and took charge, right? Kirishima looked to Kaminari next to him. Yup. Oh, and did you notice he looked like the dude on the emergency exit signs when he was on the wall earlier? Kaminari snorted. This is a waste of time. The class turned to their teacher, who was once again wrapped up in his yellow sleeping bag. I don't care who the rep is, just hurry up. He laid back down. Ada's chair squeaked as it was pushed back, the teen standing ramrod straight. If Midoriya is nominating me for this job, his right arm shot into the air. Then I humbly accept. I pledge to carry out the duties of class rep to the best of my abilities. Kirishima gave him a thumbs up. Sounds good. Emergency exit. Emergency exit Ida. Don't let us down, man. Yes, emergency exit Ida. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 cheered, throwing her arms up and rocking her chair back. Tipping her head over the edge of her chair, she beamed at the upside-down snarl Bakugo gave her. His eyes narrowed with a realization. TCH, you were the idiot who voted for him. It wasn't posed as a question, but a statement. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 blinked, smile vanishing, replaced by a slightly astonished gape. She had no idea how Bakugo pieced it together, and her stunned reaction led to her forgetting her position. The chair tipped, and with a yelp 𝗃𝗏𝗄 fell to the floor, banging her head on the edge of the blonde's desk. Laying there, holding the crown of her head with low whines, she again considered there must be more to Bakugo than just an angry jerk. Whether or not that was a good thing, she had no clue. Sato, quit goofing around. Yes, sir. Today's training will be a little different. 𝗃𝗏𝗄 bounced her right leg, anxiously chewing on the cap of one of her gel pens. She was itching to use her quirk, not having had the chance yesterday, what with everything that had gone on. You'll have 3 instructors, me, 𝐒𝐴Lmight, and another faculty member will be keeping tabs on you. Hope swelled in her chest, and she pleaded with the universe for the 3rd instructor to be her Aunt Nimiri. 𝐬𝐸 raised a hand. Sir, what kind of training is this? Aizawa pulled a card from his pocket, one that resembled the cards 𝐒𝐴Lmight used when they trained under him in the mock exercise. But this one read rescue. Hitomi barely contained an ecstatic cheer. Rescue. While not as flashy as other factions of hero work, it was what Hitomi dreamed of doing. Rescue heroes arguably saved the most lives, and that was what she needed to do. She needed to make sure as many people could get back to their families as possible. Rescue. You'll be dealing with natural disasters, shipwrecks, stuff like that. With every word spoken, Hitomi's eyes shined brighter. Disasters? Huh. Sounds like we're in for a big workout. Kaminari looked to his left, at Ishido. Totally. Real hero stuff. This is what separates the men from the boys. Kirishima leaned forward in his seat. I'm shaken with excitement. Finally, I'll get to show off how good I am in water. Ribbit. Guys, I'm not finished yet. Aizawa droned. The class fell silent. What you wear in this exercise is up to you. I know you're excited about costumes. Aizawa held up a remote, pressing a button that caused their costume cases to slide out from the wall. But keep in mind that you haven't gotten used to them yet, and they might limit your abilities. This special training's at an off-campus facility, so we'll be taking a bus to get there. That's all. Start getting ready. He walked out of the room. They all got up from their desks, walking over and claiming their cases. Hitomi sat thoughtfully, considering her options. Unlike the rest of the class, her use of her quirk kind of hinged on what she was wearing, unless she wanted to flash everyone. And she didn't think to pack any of her clothes from home that were made specially to stretch just in case. So her costume was really the only choice she was left with, despite her distaste for the revealing design. With a sigh, she went to retrieve her case. You're practically vibrating, Sato. Are you nervous? Hitomi spun on her heel, wearing the entirety of her suit. She also wore her pair of gym shoes, deciding she could kick them off later when the situation called for her quirk. She shot Uraraka a pleasant grin. Nope. Excited, she made a fist and pumped it in the air. Rescue's what I'm gonna be known for, so this lesson is perfect. Uraraka smiled back, face settling into her own look of determination. Right. We'll have to do our best and make the most of this trip. Yeah. A shrill whistle broke up any conversation. Gather around Class 1A. Ida ordered, wearing his costume, sans helmet. Using your student numbers, form 2 neat lines so we can load the bus efficiently. He blew the whistle several times more for emphasis. In the end, his planning was made null, as the bus lacked the traditional layout he had charted. Half was an open layout, while the back had a few rows of regular seating. Everyone piled in, followed by a dejected Ida. The bus's open layout ruined my boarding strategy, he lamented, head held in his hands in a regretful pose. Ida, you really need to chill. Ishido patted him commiseratingly on the back. She sat with him, Kaminari, and Aoyama on one of the long side rows of seats. Across from them on the other, Sato, Midoriya, Asui, and Kirishima. If we're pointing out the obvious, then there's something I want to say. Asui turned to her right to look at Midoriya. About you, actually. About me. What is it, Asui? He asked nervously, his cheeks already tinged with pink. From where she sat in the back, saddled next to Shiro and Shoji, Hitomi sat straighter and listened in. That power of yours, isn't it a lot like 𝐒𝐴Lmight's? Hitomi frowned when the scent of panic spiked from Midoriya, especially as he started flailing as if trying to physically grasp the right thing to say. What? Really? You think so? Huh? His voice trembled, and he looked away. I never really thought about that. Hitomi's frown deepened. He was lying. She was sure of it. But why? Wait, hold on, Sue. Kirishima spoke up, talking over Midoriya's anxious mumbling. You're forgetting 𝐒𝐴Lmight doesn't hurt himself. That makes a huge difference. Midoriya was turned away, but when he sighed, Hitomi heard it. Thoughtfully twirling her hair, she wondered why he was so desperate for no one to make such an innocent comparison. Maybe he just didn't want to have to feel like he had to live up to someone as incredible as 𝐒𝐴Lmight. What other option really was there? None that she could think of off the top of her head. Still, I bet it's cool to have a simple augmenting type of quirk. You can do lots of flashy stuff with it. Kirishima raised his left arm out for them all to see. My hardening's super strong and can destroy bad guys in a fight, but it doesn't look all that impressive. Oh, no way. I think it's really awesome looking. You're definitely pro material with a quirk like that, Midoriya kindly objected, staring at Kirishima's suddenly coarse and jagged arm. Ignoring the way Ida squawked at her disregard for the fact they were in a moving vehicle, Hitomi stood with a wide grin. Yeah, and I mean, there have been so many top pros with subtle quirks like that too. Midnight, Sir Night-Eye, Ragdoll, Rock-Lock, Pa, of Golden Geist, even Mr. Aizawa. Sato, return to your seat at once. Kirishima looked between her and Midoriya with a hesitantly hopeful expression. You really think so? Seems like it'd be easier to be a popular hero if I had something flashier. But I guess Sato's got a point. The Pinkette sat back down, silencing Ada's stern warnings. She had almost slipped up there, and sincerely hoped no one had noticed. But still, it had been nice to get to add her father to the names of top heroes with pride in her voice instead of melancholy. When Momo turned in her seat, looking back at her in concern, Hitomi was able to give her a genuine smile for reassurance. Well, if any of our classmates have pro-quirks, it's Todoroki and Bakugo, Kirishima said, garnering a glower from the blonde. Hitomi really couldn't understand why. After all, he was being paid a compliment. The other one mentioned was seemingly asleep, sitting alone behind Bakugo and Jiro. Sure, but Bakugo's always angry, so he'll never be that popular, Asui casually commented. Bakugo surged to his feet, snarling at the girl. What did you say? I'll kick your ass. You see, we basically just met you. So it's kinda telling that we all know your personality is flaming crap mixed with garbage. Kaminari shrugged with ease, unbothered by Bakugo's fury now aimed at him. You're gonna regret the day you applied to this school, you loser. I'll kill you. Well, maybe he's just aggressive like this to new people. Hitomi mused aloud, then gasped, oh my gosh, he's a Pomeranian. Zero was unsuccessful in his attempt to muffle his laughter. Bakugo could have gotten whiplash with how fast he rounded on her now. Shut your trap, you damned mutt. Geez, so many death threats. You gotta chill, dude. Kaminari seemed determined to get Bakugo to blow up the bus without the use of his quirk. Hey, we're here. Stop messing around. Aizawa informed them by the door. Yes, sir. The class all chimed in, along with Bakugo's petulant whatever. The bus stopped right in front of a massive domed building. And once inside, they were all greeted by the plush-looking hero, 13. Hello everyone, I've been waiting for you. Her kind voice came out with a tinny quality due to the spacesuit-like helmet she wore. Momo had to rest a hand on Hitomi's shoulder to keep her from jumping the hero. I can't wait to show you what's inside. 13 swept an arm in the direction of the entrance to the main part of the building, which in no way disappointed. There were so many different factions of the place that were dedicated to one specific disaster situation, all there to teach versatility. Hitomi was more eager for this lesson than anyone's previous. Holy crap, it looks like some kind of amusement park, Kirishima said in awe. A shipwreck, a landslide, a fire, a windstorm, etc. I created this training facility to prepare you to deal with different types of disasters. I call it the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, but you can call it the USJ. Hey, shouldn't All Might be here already? Aizawa asked suspiciously. Let me guess, he booked an interview instead. The disparaging tone of his voice made Hitomi wince for their other teacher. Aizawa was capable of being much scarier than he let on, and that was just what she was gleaning from his mildly irritated scent. Actually, it's something else. Apparently he did too much hero work on the way to school this morning and used up all his power. He's resting in the teacher's lounge, 13 explained in a low voice, holding up 3 fingers for some reason. Aizawa sighed. That man is the height of irresponsibility. He turned back to the students. Clock's ticking. We should get started. 13 nodded as well as she could. Excellent. Before we begin, let me just say one thing. Well, maybe 2 things. Possibly 3, 4, or 5. She cleared her throat. Listen carefully. I'm sure you're aware that I have a powerful quirk. It's called Black Hole. I can use it to suck up anything and turn it into dust. Yeah, you've used Black Hole to save people from all kinds of disasters before, haven't you? Midoriya marveled, while Uraraka nodded excitedly by his side. 13's voice took on a heavier tone. That's true, but my quirk could also very easily be used to kill. Some of you also have powers that can be dangerous. Hitomi's right hand came up, lightly pinching her ear between her fingers. She feared some days. What if she were to just go rabid? Her intelligence took a hit when her quirk was in use, but what if at some point it didn't just take a hit, but a complete fatality? Would she have any control over herself if she didn't keep focused? Would she turn on her friends and allies? Just how close was she teetering on the edge of becoming an animal? In our superhuman society, all quirks are certified and stringently regulated, so we often overlook how unsafe they can actually be. Please don't forget that if you lose focus or make the wrong move, your powers can be deadly, even if you're trying to do something virtuous like rescue someone. Thanks to Aizawa's fitness tests, you have a solid idea of your quirk's potential, and because of All Might's combat training, you likely experienced how dangerous your powers can be when used against other people. Carry those lessons over to this class. Today, you're going to learn how to use your quirks to save people's lives. You won't be using your powers to attack enemies or each other, only to help. After all, that's what being a hero is all about, ensuring the safety of others. The motto of 𝐒𝐭𝐴, her parents' hero agency, ran through Hitomi's head. Never abandon someone in need of help. Otherwise you are only a hero in name. 13 bowed. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. The class cheered, showering the pro in compliments and applause until Aizawa cut them off. Right, now that that's over, the hairs on the back of Hitomi's neck stood on end, and the sharp smell of ozone and static suddenly filled the air. The lights above flickered, sparks of electricity surging. A sour knot formed in the pit of her stomach, her instincts making her hackles rise, and canines bared as she stared out at the fountain in the center of the plaza, now sputtering and housing a swirling mass of dark purple. Run, run, run. Her mind practically screamed at her, but her knees felt like they were locked in place. Aizawa fortunately picked up on something being amiss, rounding on the fountain with an intense expression. Run, run, run. Stay together and don't move, their teacher ordered, and turned to his fellow hero. 13. Protect the students. Hitomi's body jolted, his words ringing her head, as she was suddenly overwhelmed with the scent of her classmates' fear. It washed over her, kicking something inside into gear, paired with Aizawa's words. The part of her desperate to run was silenced, replaced by something stronger. Protect, protect, protect. Momo grabbed her hand, the taller girls shaking and sweating, clinging to Hitomi with adrenaline-fueled strength. Protect, protect, protect. Someone stepped through the portal, followed closely behind by more lumbering figures. Wait, has the training started already? Kirishima said unsurely. He hadn't yet sensed the change in atmosphere. I thought we were rescuing people. Midoriya took one step forward, and Aizawa's voice snapped at them like a whip. Stay back. He clenched his jaw, lifting his yellow goggles over his eyes. This is real. Those are villains. The fear burned her nose, making bile rise on the back of her tongue. Hitomi squeezed her best friend's hand back. The air was heavy with fear, and coming in waves from the swirling mass of purple was malice, the acrid stench burning Hitomi's nose and making her eyes water. Whoever stood facing them now, dozens of lumbering figures coming out like woodwork, truly despised her and her classmate. They had to make the smell reach all the way to them. The only real heroes I see are 13 and Eraserhead. A low rumbling voice spoke from somewhere inside the purple portal. Perplexing. According to the schedule we retrieved from UA, All Might should be here as well. Mr. Aizawa took a fearless step forward. So you scumbags used the press as a cover and sneaked onto campus. Hitomi flinched, hanging her head in shame. She should have noticed, should have smelled something, should have sensed something. No, she couldn't do that to herself. Even the legit heroes hadn't felt anything was wrong, so of course she wasn't expected to be able to pick up on it either. Her instincts weren't infallible. They had their limits, and it was reckless to assume they didn't. There must have been dozens of villains approaching now, a seemingly non-stop stream of them coming from the swirling portal, all shapes and sizes, but not a single one looked friendly. The smell they brought with them made it hard to breathe. The one in the center, with severed hands disconcertingly covering several places on his body, most notably his face, spoke up. I went through the trouble of bringing so many friends who are eager to meet him. The rasped words held a tone that sounded unhinged, teetering on the edge of something seriously dangerous. They want All Might, the great symbol of peace. I can't believe he's not here, he growled, body slumping with disappointment, until he perked back up like a marionette on strings. Maybe if I kill a few kids, he'll come out to play. Standing in front of his terrified class, Mr. Aizawa's black hair flew up, defying gravity along with his incredibly long scarf. It whipped up in a way that reminded Hitomi of a threatened cat, making itself larger with its fur standing on end. What? Real villains? No way. Kirishima still denied, voice strained. How could so many of them get into a facility this secure? Yeah, 13. Momo took charge, looking to their second instructor. Why aren't the alarms going off? 13 looked up at the dead lights. Good questions. I'm not sure. Is the entire campus under attack? Todoroki asked. Or is this their only target? Either way, if the alarm sensors aren't being triggered, then one of these villains must have a quirk that's masking their presence here. They carefully chose this isolated facility as an entry point at a time when a class was being taught. They're fools for trespassing here, but they've thought this out, he surmised, easily exceeding the most Hitomi had ever heard him speak. Whatever their plan is, they must have a concrete objective in mind. But what is it? All Might. A few of her classmates turned to her, including Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki. It only then occurred to her that she had been the only one able to hear what the villain wearing hands had said. They're here for All Might, she hastily repeated, hands coming up to tug on her hair nervously. That's what the one in the middle said. Also, she bit her lip, ears tucking back. Mr. Aizawa turned his head just enough to look at her over his shoulder. What else did he say, Sato? Hitomi winced, shoulders hunching. He said, maybe if he starts killing a few of us, All Might will show up. Some of the classmates around her gasped in shock and horror, and she could hear a few of their heartbeats now, adrenaline making them race just hard enough for her to catch. Mr. Aizawa tensed, hands clenched into fists. 13, get them out of here. and alert the main campus. Actually, if they've got the ability to block our sensors, then they might be jamming our regular communications too. Kaminari, without turning, he addressed the blonde. Try using your quirk to contact the school. Yes, sir. Kaminari put a hand to the white antenna ed box over his right ear. Wait, what are you gonna do? Midoriya panicked, moving forward as if to stop their teacher. You can't fight them on your own. There's too many of them. Even if you can nullify their quirks, your fighting style's not suited for this. Your power works best in stealth and one-on-one fights. Midoriya looked down in dejection. That's not gonna help with a group. Mr. Aizawa glanced back at them over his shoulder, past his bobbing scarf. You can't be a pro if you only have one trick. He gave one last nod to his fellow teacher. I'll leave it to you. 13. Giving no warning, Mr. Aizawa, Eraserhead, launched himself into the air, bypassing the long staircase down to the plaza, hands gripping his scarf with a measured ease. He hit the ground running, never faltering even as 3 villains stood in his path, each one smirking and rearing up to attack. They never stood a chance. Hitomi's mouth fell open in awe, watching as Eraserhead erased their quirks, wrapped his scarf, capture weapon, around them, and pulled. The 3 met in the air, heads colliding with enough force to knock them out of commission in one hit. He tossed them aside like it was nothing, his weapon unraveling from around them as if it were following direct orders from him. His control over it was enough to instill fear, even without considering his quirk to go along with it. Another villain ran at him, this one with a mutation-based quirk, with rock-like arms sprouting out of his back, giving him 2 sets. One of them pulled back, aimed squarely at the hero's face. Eraserhead ducked and sidestepped to the left in one move, using the momentum from the quick change of direction to punch the villain in the jaw first. It was strong enough to send the villain flying back. But before he could hit the ground, Eraserhead threw his weapon out, getting it around the villain's ankle. In succession so fast it was hard to tell exactly what happened. Eraserhead turned, slamming his knee up into the sneering face of a villain sneaking up from behind, then pulled down on the weapon, bringing the 4-armed man down so harshly he kicked up dust when he collided with the ground. And he did all this while verbally ridiculing them as easily as breathing. Eraserhead was amazing. Their teacher was amazing. And Hitomi actually started to feel safe, despite being surrounded by people out to hurt them. Because she knew Mr. Aizawa wouldn't let that happen, not if he was still standing. He smelled of determination and protectiveness. All right, kids, let's go. 13 ordered, herding them all toward the door, which unfortunately was fairly far back, leaving them open to attacks if Eraserhead didn't keep the villain's focus entirely on him. Momo dragged Hitomi behind her, pulling the Pinkett's mystified gaze away from their teacher. But Hitomi wasn't the only one left stunned. Whoa, he's holding them off. I guess I shouldn't have underestimated him. Midoriya hesitated by the stairs, watching the fight play out as Eraserhead made a steadily growing pile of unconscious villains. This is no time to be analyzing. We have to go, Ada called, getting both Midoriya and Hitomi's attention. She finally stopped dragging her feet, running to catch up with the rest of the class, Midoriya and Momo beside her. About to reach the door, the worst possible thing happened. The purple villain, who had used whatever his quirk was exactly to help all of the villains inside, materialized in front of them, blocking off the exit. 13 threw her arm out to stop anyone from coming any closer. There is no escape for you. A pair of angular yellow eyes narrowed at them from within the mass. It's a pleasure to meet you. We are the League of Villains. I know it's impolite, but we decided to invite ourselves into this haven of justice to say hello. And besides, isn't this a fitting place for All Might, the symbol of peace, to take his last breath? I believe he was supposed to be here today, and yet I see no sign of him. There must have been some sort of change in plans we could not have foreseen. 2 wisps of purple folded out from the rest, resembling arms. Ah, well, in the end, I suppose it doesn't matter. I still have a role to play. 13 uncapped one of her gloved fingertips, raising her hand in order to suck the villain into her black hole. She would have been able to do it, if it hadn't been for 2 massive idiots. Bakugo and Kirishima threw themselves at the villain with a war cry, both poised to hit him, despite none of them having any idea as to if he even had a tangible body to strike. Knowing what was about to happen, Hitomi hunkered down and covered her ears. Right after, the air lit up with a resounding explosion, Bakugo's one gauntlet he brought making his quirk that much more powerful. Did you think we were just gonna stand around and let you tear this place to shreds? Standing beside Bakugo, smirk on his face, Kirishima held his arms in an X, skin hardened in defense. The smoke began to clear, and what they saw wasn't good. You live up to your school's reputation, but you should be more careful, children. The villain reformed his fractured body, completely unfazed in doing so. Otherwise, someone might get hurt. His eyes turned to slits. The bloodlust coming from him was so strong, Hitomi wondered how no one else could smell it. You two, get out of the way, right now. 13 shouted at Bakugo and Kirishima, hands still raised, but unable to be used with them standing in front of the villain. Before they could do as 13 said, The villain drew taller and blanketed them all in a haze of the thick purple miasma, making it nearly impossible to see anything, even each other. I'll scatter you across this facility to meet my comrades and your deaths. Momo. Hitomi blindly reached to her left, where her friend was supposed to be. What encompassed them was so dense she couldn't sniff anyone out. And the blood rushing in her ears was disorienting enough that combined with everyone yelling it made it nearly impossible to listen for her. Hitomi tried calling again, only to scream in fright as the floor suddenly vanished out from under her. Stomach dropping, Hitomi attempted to get her hair out of her face in order to see clearly, but the wind rushing against her as she fell whipped it around chaotically. To her shock and concern, she heard another voice scream out in fear somewhere next to her. It sounded feminine, and unless it was Uraraka, she likely wouldn't be able to use her quirk to slow herself down. And with how long they had already been falling, she would need to. Hitomi finally acted, kicking herself for not doing so sooner, and activated her quirk. Her hair left her vision, making the ground quickly approaching them visible. Holding her breath in preparation, she tensed all her muscles, wincing as she braced for impact. All four paws touched down hard enough to crack the concrete beneath her, shockwaves of pain shooting up and making her whimper. The person with her yelped, and Hitomi heard the sound of fabric tearing, shrinking down back to her regular body. Hitomi whirled around, looking frantically for her classmate. If she could spot them and transform again just in time, she could soften their landing. Hopefully, something sparkly caught her eye, and she zeroed in on it eagerly. Aoyama dangled about 10 feet in the air a couple yards away, his cape pierced by a wayward pole jutting out. It was then she noticed where they were, in the middle of what looked like a half-finished construction site. "Are you okay?" She jogged over, stopping right below him. Aoyama's face was a mixture of white and green. He nodded with a half-hearted hum. "Okay," Hitomi murmured, taking a deep breath as she bent her knees until she was in a low squat. Snapping them straight, she managed to grab onto his ankles, holding on as she awkwardly kicked her legs and wiggled around. After a few seconds it worked, his cape ripping a bit more, and the pole getting pulled out of the wall as it stubbornly snagged on the glittery fabric. Aoyama yelped as he hit the ground, laying there for a moment to collect himself. Hitomi leaned down, picking up the barely bent rod of metal, inspecting it. It was solid iron, going by the hefty weight, and the length was almost as tall as she was, at about 4 feet, just 1 foot and 5 inches short. What now? The blonde sat up, too shaken to fret over his damaged costume. "Are we meant to fight serious villains?" Hitomi frowned, holding a hand out to help him up. "We might have to, yeah." Aoyama made a sort of croaking noise, but took her hand nonetheless. She sighed at the strong waves of terror coming off of him, and debated with herself on whether or not sharing something with him would help. "Look, don't worry, okay. I kind of know a lot about villains and how they operate. My parents, they, looky. What do we have here?" He literally could not have been more cliché. When Hitomi and Aoyama turned toward the slimy voice, they were met with a small cluster of villains, 8 of them in total. Most had mutations, which made it easier to tell what they were dealing with. She kept her eye on one which brandished razor-sharp talons, each one almost 2 feet long. Maybe if she was fast, Hitomi could transform, grab Aoyama, and run. The biggest problem with that plan, however, was it left her classmate vulnerable, dangling by his already shredded cape from her mouth. And she didn't know what kind of range or aim he had with his laser, so him shooting at them while they retreat was a shaky plan at best. So that left her with a simple decision. Quirk or no quirk. The metal weight in her hand gave her an idea. "Aoyama, how good are you at hand-to-hand?" Hitomi settled on her choice, heaving the pole to rest casually on her right shoulder. Aoyama's lips trembled. I haven't, like you even have a chance." The clawed villain mocked, charging at the teens without preamble. Aoyama squealed, ducking behind his classmate. Hitomi squinted, in a series of what seemed like snapshots. Several things happened nearly at once. The villain, surprisingly fast on his feet, reached the two with an arm raised, poised to slice them in half. With an ease that spoke of much time being spent on similar maneuvers, Hitomi shifted her hands on the pole. Her left cupped the bottom of it loosely, keeping it from tipping over her shoulder when she released the hold she had on the base with her right. That hand she held flat, thumb extended as a sort of hook, pressed lightly on the underside. Then, as fast as she could, she pushed her left hand down and toward herself, while her right hand shoved upward and out. Just as the villain got within reach of them, he was halted as the pole came down on the top of his head. A distinctive crack came from his skull, before he dropped like a sack of flour. Hitomi blinked at his lax body, the rest of the villains doing much the same. Slowly, she looked down at the metal rod. "I was trying to point it at him threateningly. It's longer than I'm used to." She shrugged, unbothered by the body, able to hear his breathing. But fortunately for her and Aoyama, the rest of them had no way of knowing that their comrade was still alive. "Oh well, besides, this way's easier." Hitomi twirled the pole, making an effort to add enough flair to the show to make it seem like she knew what she was doing, using it as a weapon. Who knew 𝐼𝐼𝐵 forcing her into as many clubs as she could would ever actually pay off? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 would never complain about how grueling baton twirling practice had been ever again. Between panting breaths, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 winced and whispered a weak "oh." Arms heavy and sore, she let the hefty metal rod slip from her hands, clattering on the ground noisily, making 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 next to her flinch. Her classmate was in worse shape, cradling his middle with a sickened expression and green pallor. Apparently his quirk made him sick. Poor thing. These were villains? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 incredulously asked, wiggling her arms to try to regain some feeling in them. She may be strong, but swinging around a solid pole of iron at extremely hard heads really put a burn in her biceps. Around them, strewn haphazardly in heaps of twitching limbs, was the group of villains sent after them, half burned to some degree, and the other with some serious blunt force trauma. It was hard to say which got off easier. The 𝗵𝗃𝗃 was shocked that they had barely managed to land a hit on either of them, only leaving 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐵 with a bruised and swelling left cheek, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 with a shallow gash across her right one. It was pretty pathetic, all things considered. She knew that if they had been villains worth their salt, then she and her classmate would have been in monstrous trouble. Vicious wounds would have been the best-case scenario, but in all likelihood they probably would have ended up dead. They hadn't even finished their first week at UA, which really went to show how weak these bad guys were. Quantity over quality at its finest. What now, mon ami? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 blinked at the sudden use of French, but recovered quickly enough. Well, we should get back to the others. She nodded once, as if to reassure herself that that was the right course of action. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐵 nodded along, but then shot her a dubious look. But where exactly are they? That. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 pointed at him with a strained smile. Is an excellent question. Taking a cursory sniff of the air, the only smells to greet her were that of dust, metal, and the various body odors coming from the unconscious villains. Any far-off scents were masked by the overpowering ones she picked up on in the nearby vicinity. So they just had to play it by ear. Literally, their best bet was picking a direction and walking until she picked up on any telltale sounds of battle. Hopefully 𝗵𝘃𝗃 would go all out when and if he ran into any bad guys. His explosions were the most likely thing for her to catch, no matter the distance. All right, she pumped her fists, spinning on her heel, choosing a random path, and marching onward. Let's go. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 made it 10 feet before she noticed there were no footsteps following behind her. Looking back, she saw her classmate standing in the same exact spot, still cradling his stomach, now with an even more strained expression. 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐵, are you coming? The blonde did a quick flare with his right hand, before it shot back down to rejoin the left, a sparkle shimmering from his faintly squinted eyes. I'm afraid I cannot. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 scratched the spot behind her ears, head cocking. Why? 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐵's ever-present smile twitched. If I move, it will not bode well for either of us. Blinking twice, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 ignored her raging curiosity at whatever that could possibly mean, and accepted it with a shrug. All right, I'll come back to get you after I find the others. With one last glance back to check and make sure he wasn't about to change his mind, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 retrieved the pole and took off. Thankfully, the area they were dropped into was pretty simplistic for what it was, a flat cityscape in varying levels of destruction, so it really didn't take too much energy for her to run through the empty street. Now if it had been the rockslide zone, or someplace similar, she probably would have had to transform in order to get around in decent time, using the superior height to leap and bound over obstacles. And until she knew if they had backup coming, she needed to reserve as much time spent using her quirk as possible. Hopefully, wherever she was, Momo was already figuring out how to save the day, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 didn't doubt for a second that she could. The collapse zone was on the opposite side from the entrance she remembered seeing when they first entered the building. At first she lamented her luck, knowing the longer it took her to get back there, the more likely it was she would run into more villains. And who's to say they would be as weak as the last ones? But as she was sprinting past a crumbling office building, she heard a miniature explosion coming from within, light flashing from a window on the 4th floor. A sharp-toothed grin split across her face. Easy peasy. Aunt Rumi had her climbing up to 5 stories with aid from her quirk. Of course, that was almost a half a year ago, before she grew even bigger in popularity and was sought out for more frequent work. She barely had time anymore to even come and see her adorable toddler niece, let alone dedicate hours to show off the dos and don'ts of Parker. Taking a steadying breath, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 backed up a few paces and shot toward the nearest wall of the building. The pole was hastily put in her mouth to hold, something she would severely regret later, as chewing with the sore muscles would become an absolute chore, and reached high as she stepped onto one of the first-floor window sills, straightened that leg in a snap and launching herself up to the 2nd level. She bit down on the pole, grimacing at the feeling of it against her teeth, and gripped the 2nd sill with both hands, knuckles quickly turning white. One great thing about her costume, she decided, was the arm warmers. They reached down to her fingers, actively shielding her palms from the rough bite of the concrete. Grunting lowly, Hitomi began pulling her upper body up by the sill, while she tried using her legs to help boost her, walking up the side. With one last great heave, she stood crouching on the sill, panting through her nose, mouth full of the taste of metal. Careful to keep balanced, she peeked out, looking up at the third and fourth ones with a tired sigh. At least it sounded like Bakugo was finished fighting. Maybe if she was lucky she wouldn't have to fight anyone for a bit, and give her sore arms some much-needed rest. Of course, that was after she got herself up to the 4th floor. Could she simply drop inside and find a staircase to walk up? Definitely. Was she going to waste the opportunity to make a surprise entrance and admittedly show off? Absolutely not. If we're both still in the USJ, then everyone else probably is, too. Oh hey, it's Kirishima. Hitomi perked up, recognizing the voice coming from above. A flare of annoyance struck once she remembered about the two throwing themselves at the purple villain. But it petered out before she even finished situating herself on the 3rd sill. And not all of them have the offensive skills we do. We gotta make sure they're safe, Kirishima said determinedly, reminding the pinkette of her classmates like the really quiet one, Kota, who likely wouldn't last long alone. When he spoke again, Kirishima's voice was tight with regret, especially since we screwed things up when we got in the way earlier. If 13 had been able to suck up that villain, then we never would have been separated like that. We have to make it up to the others. Hitomi could smell the remorse rolling off of him in waves. The sight that greeted her when she crested over the final sill was rather impressive. Strewn about the floor were clobbered villains, scorched or bruising, much like the ones she and Aoyama left in their wake. But these ones were decidedly bigger, and with more offensive-looking mutations on some. You want to track everyone down, have fun. But I'm gonna go destroy that warpy bastard. Bakugo spat determinedly. Hitomi dropped the pole into her right hand, casually crouching in the window, looking back and forth between her classmates. Ears flicking, she glanced up and left, barely making out some distorted shape crawling along the ceiling. She raised a hand, vaguely pointing at it. Kirishima's brows furrowed in clear disagreement. Our physical attacks didn't hurt that guy. Come on, don't be an idiot, man. Bakugo's jaw clenched harder with every word the redhead spoke. Shut up. I'm gonna take him down because he's their way in and out. Hitomi perked up in surprise. He actually had a very solid reason that didn't hinge on mindless revenge. She decided to remain silent, listening in as neither of them noticed her obvious presence yet, and they didn't notice the camouflaged villain either, who is now on the floor and creeping toward Bakugo. If I cut off their escape route, they'll be stuck here and have to pay for what they've done. We'll just have to figure it out. The camouflaged villain struck, launching himself at the angry blonde, who caught him by the head midair, and soundly ignited the same palm, effectively knocking him out. The camo fell away, revealing a humanoid iguana. Anyway, Bakugo carried on, casually giving the villain a once-over. If all these villains are small fries like these guys were, then our classmates can handle him. That reaction time was insane, Kirishima praised openly. Also, since when do you act so calm and rational? Usually you're all like an angry Pomeranian. Hitomi piped up chirpily. Bakugo rounded on her furiously. Who are you calling? Both he and Kirishima paused, finally taking stock of her appearance. Yeah, it was so worth scaling the building to see their faces. Sato, Kirishima gawked at his classmate. Hitomi waved. Yo, how did you get up here? Kirishima cautiously approached her. Bakugo glowered with narrowed eyes, suspiciously watching her. I climbed. You say that as if it's just something totally normal. Hitomi cocked her head. It is. My Aunt Rumi trained me in parkour. She said my legs are my greatest asset, second only to my quirk. How long have you been there? Bakugo growled. An admittedly sly grin spread across her face. A while, Bakugo scoffed, turning to leave. Go find the others if you want to, or sit around with your thumbs up your asses, I don't care. Wait, hold up. Kirishima called out to him before Hitomi could. I think what you're really saying is that you believe in our classmates. And that's thinking like a man, Bakugo. The blonde scowled, spitting out a TCH, but still paused to give either of the other two the chance to follow. Hitomi smiled at his uncharacteristic show of tolerance. Well then, I'll come T. Her ears went back, eyes widening as her face fell. Far off, carried as it bounced and echoed their way through the collapse zone, she heard it. Arg, Mr. Aizawa's agonized shout, followed by something snapping. No, Kirishima and Bakugo had no time to ask her why she suddenly looked so stricken, as she spun around on the sill and leapt off. When she touched down, the pavement cracked under the weight of her shifted body, but the drop did nothing to her but cause a faint shock to shoot up through her legs. It had nothing on the fall earlier. The metal pole was carelessly left behind, of no use to her anymore now, not when she was utilizing her quirk. Sato, Kirishima called after her, but she was already halfway down the block before he could shout out to her again. The air whipped against her harshly enough it likely would have stung if she didn't have fur protecting her skin, and she tucked her ears back to avoid hearing it whistle by. The sound came from the middle of the USJ, close to where the villains spilled out of that portal in the first place. The closer she got, barreling out of the collapse zone, the stronger the tang of blood hung in the air. Hitomi could only pray it wasn't Mr. Aizawa's. But, nearing the origin of the cry, Hitomi was greeted by a massive figure, crouching over a crumbled black-clad body. A certain capture weapon spooled out around him, soaking up crimson red from a still-spreading puddle of blood. The animalistic part of her that took over when transformed howled in rage. Her mind, dulled down to a more emotionally guided consciousness, drove her forward like a cannon, shot right at the dark indigo-skinned beast hurting her teacher, with every intent to harm and draw blood in restitution. She paid no mind to the hand-wearing villain standing a short distance away, or the misty warp one Bakugo and Kirishima were after, bypassing both of them to launch herself at the large one's back. All four of her clawed paws scrambled to find purchase on its back and left shoulder as she lowered her head and sunk her teeth into its right one, a furious growl rumbling through her chest and throat. She had taken down several villains before this with Aoyama. She had been the first one to get to Mr. Aizawa. She had been raised by two of the best heroes in the world. She was going to take down this villain and rescue her teacher. Confidence surged in her chest, a true belief that she could handle this and help brimming. This was what she was meant to do. I can do this. Her teeth tried sinking deeper, finding rubbery resistance, but she was not deterred. I can save Mr. Eyes. A massive hand raised up and fisted the loose skin and fur of her scruff, grip pinching and unrelenting. Wah! The shoulder disappeared from her mouth, and Hitomi got a glimpse of the domed ceiling above before her body was whipped down to the ground savagely. Pain, horrible, sharp, sudden, agonizing pain erupted from the back of her head. A grunted scream broke through her throat unintentionally, sounding like a wail from an injured and fearful animal as her Akita form fell away, her consciousness flickering along with it. Hitomi blinked blurrily, thoughts lagging at a snail's pace to figure out what just happened. Mr. Aizawa attempted to grunt something out, but it was unintelligible with his face pressed into the ground. She wanted to spring to her feet and charge again, but her body wouldn't move. If only she could move. Perfect. That dry, raspy voice belonging to the hand-wearing villain spoke, sounding disconcertingly smug. I'll just start with this one. Hitomi tensed, picking up on the way that Mr. Aizawa began struggling harder in the large one's grasp. She could smell thick panic underneath the scent of blood. And to her hazy confusion, she could detect it not only coming from her teacher, but something slimy coiled around Hitomi's bare midriff, wrapping itself tight before she felt herself being yanked away. She shut her eyes as she was made airborne, vertigo threatening to cause her to vomit. Thankfully, she was pulled back down quickly, the slimy thing around her waist retreating. Belatedly, Hitomi realized she was now being held by someone, chest deep in water. I've got you, Ribbit. Hitomi's eyes fluttered open, and she felt something in her chest loosen at the sight of Usui at her side. That explained the slimy appendage that grabbed her. Great, now he knows we're here, Mineta shrieked, frantically hiding behind Midoriya. Sure enough, the move to get Hitomi away from him had revealed the three to the villains, leaving them all in a vulnerable position, especially with Hitomi's pounding head and uncooperative limbs. The hand-wearing villain stared at them in eerie silence, the pale severed appendage on his face masking whatever expression lied underneath. Hitomi had no way to tell if what happened next was thanks to her sure concussion, or if it really played out at the speed she saw it, because suddenly, he was in front of them, left hand outstretched, aiming for Usui's face. He was just there, too close for any of them to do or even think of something in defense. Forcing her body to move, Hitomi managed to turn and shield Usui as best she could, closing her eyes and bracing herself for what was about to happen. Usui saved her, and she was prepared to do the same. But Hitomi felt the villain's hand settle on the back of her head, and the only thing to happen was a jolt of pain from the tender bump there. She hesitantly cracked an eye open, meeting Usui's wide and terrified gaze. The villain huffed, glancing back over his shoulder. You really are so cool. Erase her head. Hitomi wanted nothing more than to turn and look at her teacher, but with the hand still touching her she was frozen in fear. She didn't know what his quirk was, but she could guess it was something horrible if Mr. Aizawa forced himself up to prevent it from being used. Their teacher cried out in pain again, the sound of something slamming into the ground accompanying it. The scent of fresh blood made Hitomi's stomach drop and roll. The villain's quirk. Mr. Aizawa couldn't detain it anymore, and the villain was still touching her. You, let her go. Now, Midoriya disappeared from their side, having launched himself out of the water and at the villain. Smash! He roared All Might's iconic battle cry, his right arm seeming to glow for a second, before he shot his fist out ruthlessly at the villain. Hitomi remembered the ball test, the speed and distance it soared, and that was just with one finger. The hit created an aftershock, gusts of harsh wind throwing all their hair around and almost making it feel hard to breathe. Behind them in the water, large waves rolled back, and the sound of shattering glass came from somewhere above. If the villain survived it, he would surely need immediate medical attention if he wanted to stay that way. When it finally dissipated, Hitomi noticed the hand was gone from her head, and finally looked back to see if there was anything left of the villain. What she saw, however, was the villain perfectly intact, now with the massive one standing between him and Midoriya, acting as a human shield. Midoriya stared at where his fist connected with the large one's abdomen, with no signs that it did remotely any damage. "You're pretty powerful," the hand villain mused. "This smash of yours. Are you one of All Might's disciples?" He shrugged, raising his hand again. "Doesn't matter. I'm done with you now." The hand villain reached for both Hitomi and Mina's faces. The huge bug-eyed villain grabbed Midoriya's right arm and poised its own to slam down on the teen. Asui pulled Hitomi back and shot her tongue out to wrap around Midoriya and snatch him away. And despite no longer being held down, Mr. Aizawa wasn't moving. Hitomi clenched her eyes shut tight, her chest shaking with withheld sobs of fear and defeat. "Mama, Pa," the entrance boomed open, a cloud of dust billowing out, visible all the way to the plaza. Heavy steps hit the floor audibly, carrying forward a towering silhouette from within the slowly falling cloak in the air. The hand villain stood straight, abandoning his previous goal of touching Hitomi and Mina, turning to watch the arrival of their guest of honor. "Have no fear, students." Hitomi's eyes welled up, thick tears rolling shamelessly down her face in overwhelming relief. They were going to be okay. They were saved. All Might's ever-present smile was gone, replaced by a glare strong enough to make any villain's blood go cold. "Because I am here, All Might." Hitomi sagged, her eyelids drooping in exhaustion and her adrenaline ebbing away. With it dulling, the pain in her head became more pronounced, a throbbing matching her pulse coming from the base. "We're saved," Mina cheered tearily, forgetting about the villain still very much too close to them all. "He's here, All Might," Midoriya croaked, staring up at the entrance with a nervous crease between his brows. "And he's not smiling." The hand-clad villain stood, turning away from the three in the water in favor of watching All Might's approach. After all this waiting, the heroic piece of trash shows up. It was bold words, considering in the next second All Might mowed down every single minor villain standing between him and Mr. Aizawa's crumpled form. His moves were too fast to try to follow, a blur and gust leaving behind a trail of unconscious bodies. But he was the opposite when picking up his fellow teacher, slow and gentle as not to hurt him any further. As it was, Mr. Aizawa dearly needed immediate medical attention. With 2 broken arms, the muscles and tendons visible on his right elbow, and his face caked with a mask of blood, the damage done was monstrous. Still cradling Mr. Aizawa, All Might turned to them, and Hitomi blinked, vaguely aware that she and the others were now a good 20 feet away from the 3 villains. The sudden shift, along with now holding up her own weight without the help of the water, made her wobble and teeter, just barely keeping herself standing straight. Maybe it was a little bit more than a concussion. "What the heck?" Mina squawked at their new position. "Everybody, back to the entrance," All Might ordered sternly, setting down Mr. Aizawa in front of them. "And take Aizawa with you. He doesn't have much time." Hitomi's mouth went dry, her eyes unable to settle on the mangled teacher for long without a sick roll in her stomach threatened for her to lose her breakfast. When she tried stepping forward to help hoist him up, she found herself being supported by Asui in a flash. "You started to fall, Ribbit," Asui explained after the confused noise that came from Hitomi's throat. "Okay, so definitely something worse than a concussion." Midoriya lifted Mr. Aizawa up onto his back, carefully holding onto his arms above the brakes. Mina then picked up his ankles so his feet wouldn't drag across the ground behind him. "All Might, you can't," Midoriya warned him, panic lacing his voice. "That brain villain took one for," he faltered, eyes flickering to his classmates. I smashed him and didn't break my arm this time, but he wasn't fazed at all. He's too strong." All Might threw a hand out to stop him. "Young Midoriya," he closed his hand and pointed his thumb up. His smile was firmly back in place. "I got this." While the 2 boys carried away Mr. Aizawa, Asui held onto Hitomi for her support, her wide eyes keeping watchful of the pinkette, especially when she noticed a thick trail of blood slowly leaking down the back of her neck. For Hitomi's part, she just focused on staying awake, wincing every time All Might threw a hit at the large villain behind them, the collision loud enough to make her ears ring. The final hit came louder than the previous ones, a shroud of dust erupting with whips of wind shooting out all the way over to them. Midoriya, Asui, and Mina all looked back curiously, and Hitomi would have done the same if she could manage to even lift her head higher. "Whoa, are you guys seeing this?" Mina said in awe. That suplex looked like a huge explosion. Explosion. What was that word making her think of? It was right there on the tip of her tongue. Spiky ash blonde hair. The smell of burnt caramel. Crap. Hitomi tensed, remembering Bakugo and Kirishima's plan to find and take down the warp villain, who was currently spectating the fight between All Might and the big one. If the 2 crashed onto the scene, All Might would have to divide his attention to also keeping them safe. Hitomi opened her mouth, trying to call to Midoriya and warn him, but a wheezy cough kept her from it. She must have inhaled some of the appended dust when she was slammed down a few minutes ago. Unaware of her struggle, 𝐬𝐴 chimed in about the top hero. And yet he still has to look at his notes when he's teaching us. Get that guy. 𝗵𝗲 cheered over his shoulder. Punch him right in the balls. Maybe we were worried about these bad guys for nothing. 𝐬𝐴 mused. All Might's unstoppable. But the overpowering smell of concern and uncertainty coming from Midoriya made Hitomi doubtful. Midoriya. Hitomi got out after clearing her throat. Bakugo and Kirishima are. All four of them came to an abrupt halt. Midoriya, 𝐬𝐴, and 𝗵𝗲 because they could see what was going on behind them. And as for Hitomi, she smelled a new source of blood, finally forcing up her head, which felt weighed down by a ton of bricks. Hitomi checked over her shoulder, seeing what had left the others frozen. All Might was bent backwards, still holding the bug-eyed villain's torso to slam him into the ground. But the warp villain had opened two portals, one for the massive one's upper half to go through, and one under All Might for it to come out of. Its clawed left hand was digging into All Might's left side, sinking them in deep, leaving blood to soak through that side of the hero's white shirt. 𝐬𝐴, Midoriya croaked lowly. Yeah, what is it, Midoriya? Will you carry Mr. Aizawa for me? His eyes were overshadowed by his curly hair, giving no indication of what he was planning. 𝐬𝐴 looked at Hitomi, who carefully pushed herself upright and gave a reassuring nod. Ribbit, sure, but what are you gonna do? As soon as Mr. Aizawa was gently transferred to 𝐬𝐴's back, Midoriya turned and staggered toward the fight. After a few shaky steps, he launched forward, sprinting to their endangered teacher. Are you crazy? 𝗵𝗲 screeched at his back. Hitomi went cold. All Might, the #1 hero, was getting hurt by these guys. What could possibly make Midoriya think he could take them on? Midoriya, Hitomi screamed as the warp villain appeared right in front of him, looming with a promise of death. Without conscious thought, she tried running after him because he was going to get himself killed. But her vision faded in and out, and she was suddenly on the ground before she could even take more than a few steps. No, she tried pushing herself up, gritting her teeth stubbornly. She had to get up. She had to help him. She had to. A booming explosion that brought the smell of burnt caramel with it sounded from up ahead. Get the hell out of my way, Deku. Hitomi's arms gave out, a wave of relief and new concern welling in her chest. Bakugo had arrived. Presumably so had Kirishima, but would they be enough to help Midoriya and keep themselves alive? One of my classmates told us you're here because you think you can kill All Might. Another voice evenly stated. Todoroki. He was there now too. Hitomi cracked a smile, her eyes fluttering closed without thought. The tables had turned. The villains were in trouble now. Sato, 𝐬𝐴 called, sounding as if it wasn't the first time she tried getting her attention. Hitomi hummed, or at least she attempted to. She wasn't sure if she actually did. 𝐬𝐴 seemed to pick up on that she was barely there consciously, and wrapped her tongue around her middle again, slowly lifting her. Come on, we need to hurry. She spoke around her tongue, picking up the pace toward the entrance. Hitomi was limp in the air, arms and legs dangling lifelessly under her, her hair laying as a curtain over her face, facing downward. She felt blood leaking into the edge of her hairline, and distantly wondered how much she had lost already, remembering that head wounds tended to bleed heavier than other areas. Once the three of them were spotted by the portion of the class hanging by the entrance, Uraraka and Shoji came down to help. Uraraka used her quirk to gently float Mr. Aizawa onto Shoji's broad back. Then once 𝐬𝐴 lowered her, she took Hitomi's left arm and slung it over her shoulder. 𝐬𝐴 did the same with her right, and the two practically carried her up the towering set of stairs. Once at the top, she saw Zero, Sato, Ishido, and 13. It made Hitomi worried to see that neither Momo or Aoyama had made it back yet, and she was starting to doubt leaving the blonde alone earlier. For all she knew, he had run into more bad guys as soon as she left. Hurry up, let's get out of here already, 𝗵𝗲 urged, emphatically gesturing toward the exit while Zero and Sato hefted 13 up and supported her. But the others, Ishido started to protest, but was cut off by a thunder-like clap, followed immediately by a part of the glass dome above shattering. Those who were facing the direction of the sounds gaped at what caused it. Did a villain just fly by? Or am I going crazy? Zero gawked at the hole in the dome, where the indigo villain had been sent soaring. It was that big dude, Sato confirmed. Such power. Shoji voiced what they were all thinking. 𝗵𝗲 stared teary-eyed, his enthusiasm for leaving waning with the scariest villain now gone. That's All Might for you. That's why he's the most amazing hero in the entire world. Sato. Uraraka looked down inquisitively, feeling the way Hitomi tensed and tried standing straighter. Her ears flicked, and her tail languidly swung side to side. The barest hints of a smile spread across her face. They were here. Sorry everyone, I know we're a bit late. Snipe, Ectoplasm, Cementos, Present Mike, Hound Dog, Power Loader, Vlad King, Principal Nezu, and Aunt Nimuri. Hitomi croaked thickly. I got the teachers over here as fast as I could. Principal Nezu sat atop Vlad King's shoulders, his voice still cheery as always. Snipe lifted one of his guns, shooting off 3 shots, one toward the plaza and the other 2 toward the mountain zone. In front of the lineup of heroes, Ada stood proudly, hair windswept from his race to UA. Your class rep has returned. I've fulfilled my duty, and I've brought reinforcements. Hitomi clumsily slid her arms off of Uraraka and Isui's shoulders, stumbling forward while ignoring the way every step gave another pound to her skull. Midnight's face softened in concern, approaching her with open arms despite the pressing situation. Oh Hitomi, your head. Hitomi took the silent invitation, letting herself slump limply in her pseudo-aunt's arms, tension ebbing away in the older woman's embrace. 𝐬𝐴 shouldn't bother you right now, and I'm sure this can't look PR-fessional. Midnight sighed, gently petting the back of her head, pausing and sighing heavier when she felt the large bump already forming at the base. The wet and dried blood matting the pink locks wasn't something to brush off either. I think we're already past that point. I recommended you, remember? Present Mike inhaled deeply, and Midnight wordlessly cupped her hands over Hitomi's ears right before he let loose on the villains who were only now recovering from All Might taking them down. Before they could even think of getting up after the vocal shockwave, ectoplasm gave them no time, making a dozen clones that began wailing on them. It was a wonder that so many were still conscious. Our priority is to protect all of our students, Principal Nezu delegated with a smile, pointing onward toward the thick of villains. Yes, sir. Don't move, all right. Midnight softly ordered Hitomi, parting from her with a carefully placed pat on the head. Down at the plaza, the hand villain ran to the warp one, assumably to retreat, but Snipe ruthlessly shot him in both arms and legs, the warp villain shielding him before he could be hit anywhere else. His mist enveloped the hand villain, and with half his body still sticking out, 13 stood on trembling legs and opened black hole with both hands, the power and reach managing to suck up much of the warp villain's smoke, slowing him down considerably. But despite their efforts, he finished pulling the hand villain through, disappearing himself in a shrinking swirl right after. And that was it. It was jarring. After so much chaos and danger, it was suddenly quiet, almost deafeningly so. All the minor villains were already being subdued by Hound Dog and Vlad King, or knocked out by Midnight, and the rest of the scattered class was being retrieved by the rest of the heroes and some clones of ectoplasm. Everything was being handled. It was over. They survived their first encounter with villains. Hitomi tentatively ran a hand through her bloodied hair, some better than others. Nori Sato was many different things to many different people. To Ayami, he was a stubborn yet caring kid she still considered under her care. To Hana, he was a mix between an uncle and older brother, always willing to humor her and goof around. To his colleagues, he was a stern and serious hard worker, dedicated to doing his best and live up to being promoted to sous chef. To the public, he was the tragic dead hero's son who could never follow his parents' footsteps due to his macabre quirk. And to Hitomi, he was a lot of things. A big brother, a pain in the neck, a friend, a confidant, a heckler, a protector, a role model. But there was one thing Nori tried his damnedest to be, and that was a constant. And the first time it really occurred to him that his sister might not always be there for him the same way was before she got her quirk. And it was something that he still did his best to ignore to this day. School had let out finally, and Nori meandered along beside his 3 friends at a leisurely pace, hands in his sagging pockets. He was in no rush, as for once Hitomi was granted permission to play at the nearby park, so he didn't have to pick her up from her school first thing. When they grew closer to the playground, Ryuji spotted a vending machine and they naturally congregated over. I gotta go soon, Nori commented after checking his watch. Hitomi needs me to walk her home. Sai scoffed as he retrieved his drink from the slot at the bottom. Dude, don't you guys have a nanny or something? Why doesn't she do her job instead of pawning the midget off on you? Nori frowned at the unwarranted jab at Ayami, sliding a bill into the machine and absently looking over the options. It's not a big deal, it's not like I mind. Kazuto shook his head in dismay. I don't get it, man. Get what? Nori asked, settling on a simple bottle of decaf green tea. He knew Hitomi liked it, so he could share during the trip home. Get how you put up with that little pest. The button for green tea was jammed violently in a jerk. Sai and Ryuji noticed, and attempted to silently signal for Kazuto to zip it. What is that supposed to mean? Now Kazuto took stock of Nori's darkened expression, and frantically tried to backtrack. Wait, I mean, it's just that. The air around Nori grew heavier, and all 3 other boys were given an abrupt reminder of what his quirk was capable of. Look man, I didn't mean anything by it. Kazuto chuckled nervously, carefully taking a few steps back, with Sai and Ryuji doing the same. It's just that she's, kinda annoying. Nori's eyes almost seemed to glow, the gold burning molten in anger. He didn't even need to use his quirk to instill fear into them. Not with that look. Kazuto did his best to save face, spitting out a weak scoff, and turned away while still keeping an eye on Nori over his shoulder. TCH, whatever. Let's go guys. Sai and Ryuji sent uncertain glances back, but ultimately followed after Kazuto, escaping the stifling cloud of fury Nori left hanging in the air. The redhead watched them retreat, a mixture of emotions warring in him. He wouldn't put up with anyone who spoke ill about Hitomi. But at the same time, those three had been the only ones in his year to not judge him for his quirk, and now he chased them off. Nori scowled, right fist clenching tight. He reared it back and slammed it into the vending machine, unbothered by the harsh sting it left behind in his knuckles. Again and again, he punched it, all while his aggravated thoughts shifted. If only he didn't spend so much time with Hitomi. If only his friends didn't have to see her so often. If only she was less excitable all the time and a little quieter. Nori. He froze, fist stopping just short of connecting with the glass again. Nori turned his head, staring as Hitomi cheerily raced over, her face flushed in delight. Nori, she repeated once in front of him. Nori, I met someone at the park, with the most prettiest hair I've ever seen. I went over to say something, but then I smelled tears, and so I asked what was wrong, and she cut herself off, ears going back in a telltale sign of distress. Nori, you're bleeding. Nori blinked, numbly looking down at his split knuckles. Yeah, I'm okay though. Hitomi frowned doubtfully, and with a start, Nori remembered what he had just been thinking just before she showed up. He was wishing she was different, more subdued, less herself. Kneeling down, Nori swallowed the guilt of it, and instead focused on giving her a convincing smile. I promise. Now, tell me about this person with pretty hair. Hitomi perked up right away, her tail turning into a blur behind her. Oh yeah, so I asked him what was wrong, and he said his quirk's scary and now his friends won't play with him. Nori's brows furrowed. Didn't that sound familiar? Is that so? Hitomi nodded quickly. Yeah, but I told him that that's stupid, and that you got a scary quirk but you've got friends. Nori flinched. Right. Then he noticed something he had missed in the rush of information. Wait, it was a boy. Hitomi nodded again. 𝗵𝗃𝗬𝐵, and he had the prettiest hair ever. It was. What did you call it? The purple flower color. Lilac. Nori supplied with narrowed eyes. Yeah, lilac. And after I said his quirk's perfect for a hero, he said my hair's pretty too, and gave me this. Hitomi carefully retracted a single daffodil from up against her left ear. Nori's eye twitched. How old was this boy? Same as me. She blinked, staring at him with a cock of her head. Why do you smell like mama when the neighbor lady talks to papa? Nori stood, picking her up without preamble, holding her against his side while walking toward their neighborhood. Don't worry about it. I just need you to promise never to date anyone, especially boys. Boys are terrible. Hitomi cocked her head again. Okay, I promise. And promise you'll never stop being loud and happy. She nodded. Promise. Nori stopped, gazing contemplatively at the ground. And promise me you'll let me look out for you. From boys, from mean kids, from everything. All right. Hitomi took longer this time, ears tucked back once more. Okay, Nori, I promise. Nori sighed. A weight he hadn't realized was there lessened, allowing him to breathe just a bit easier. It took until he was unlocking their front door to realize he forgot about the green tea. He was supposed to be worrying about her making the wrong kinds of friends, or start dating like he always dreaded. Those kinds of things he could protect her from. Nori couldn't protect her from villains, but he would do his best to make sure the school meant to teach her safely didn't make another fuck-up like the one currently leading him to the hospital in the middle of his shift. Hitomi got a major concussion, maybe even a fractured skull, all under the watch of UA. Nori was going to raise some hell.